Naruto simply stared at the dumbest villagers he had seen in his entire life. Seriously. 4 years of being called a demon and a monster without doing anything to prove them right, was causing his young mind to think that maybe they were the real monsters in this ill-begotten country. It could be said that in the short 4 years of his life, he had been forced to grow up rather fast, and as of late, he was beginning to notice that the villagers' misplaced hate was starting to really grate on his nerves. He had seen other kids with their parents, of course. Hell, strangers didn't even treat themselves like he was being treated. What would he have to do to just get them to back off and leave him the hell alone? His golden blonde hair waved as he stood contemplating this latest setback in his mission to prove the villagers wrong. Why am I trying to do this again? In front of him stood 2 villagers, their beer bellies sticking slightly out of their bulging jumpers as they glared at him with grossly mishaped, bloodshot eyes. "Ya damn monster. Wha the heck ya think ya tryna pull comin' into our shop like that?" The one on the right raged as he waved his beer bottle in the air manically. "Ya ain't got no right to step ya filthy feet past the doorway, here." The man's belly wobbled, his puckered fat lips foaming as he bellowed in anger at the youngster. Naruto almost cracked up there and then at the sheer absurdity of the situation. Almost. The second villager, a rotund, greasy brown-haired man, stood to the left of his companion glaring with an almost frigid gaze. However, it was his words that were the catalyst to a world-changing decision that would haunt Konoha for years to come. It could be said, that as he had a more sober mind and was able to communicate in more than a drunkard slur, his words carried far more weight than that of his maniac of a counterpart. "You, who have killed so many of our friends and family, have no right to enter any of the shops and buildings anywhere within Konoha. You should be dead." Spitting the last statement from his mouth, he turned and stomped away, leaving his companion to finish up with the innocent youth. "What the hell does that mean, you fat geezer? I haven't killed anyone. You people are the ones that always hurt me." It was safe to say that Naruto was close to his breaking point. After everything he had been through in his life, this guy had the audacity to say that he, 4¼ years old Uzumaki Naruto, was responsible for people dying? He had never lifted a finger to an animal, let alone a human. "Don't go playin' dumb, ya stupid demon. We all know just why ya capable of." Throwing his empty bottle at Naruto, he turned to follow after his companion, probably to return to more rounds of alcohol and drunkenness. Naruto was livid. Capable. Him. He wasn't anywhere near what one could call capable. Why, if he was so capable, could he not push the swing by himself while he sat on it? Why, if he was so capable, could he not cook any of the delicious food he had seen being made in all those top-class restaurants? Why, if he was so capable, could he not protect himself when the villagers attacked him for no reason? The brown bottle that the man had thrown, bounced off his head with a dull thud, and Naruto was left with an incessant ringing in his ears and cloudy vision for the next 5 minutes. Even as he stood there, staring at the ground, his small face scrunched up with tears leaking from the corner of his eyes, he knew that these people didn't deserve protection, they didn't deserve his trust. The words of the quiet drunk resounded in his head over and over. "You should be dead." He couldn't take it anymore. His small brain was almost exploding with confusion, hurt and anger. The image of his lonely form sitting on a swing in one of Konoha's small parks kept appearing in his mind. How many times had he wished that there would be someone there to push him, to let him experience the rushing wind, as he swung, whooping and screaming at the top of his lungs. How many times had he wondered that if nobody would push him, maybe a strong enough breeze would force his small body into the air instead. He had witnessed the ones his Jiji called ninja, springing from the rooftops at high speed, and he wondered what it would be like to have to rely on no one. Slowly, he came to, the ringing in his ears subsiding and the fog over his vision dispersing. He realized he was still standing at the side of the curb in one of Konoha's busier market districts. The sun had begun to set and many of the shopkeepers were packing up, readying themselves to go home, Again something he wished he had. He knew there was no point returning to the orphanage, they would kick him out again anyway. No, he'd sleep outside today. Besides, he had his monthly meeting with the Hokage tomorrow and he wanted to ask his Jiji all the questions that were assaulting his mind. Raising his head, he watched as the sun disappeared over the top of a building before turning to trudge towards the forest. At least the idiot villagers couldn't catch him there. And with the setting of the sun, so did the dream to be Hokage diminish from his small mind. The sun would rise again, but his dream was irrevocably changed. He couldn't remember when he had first started thinking of being free from his cage. Free, like the sun. Sarutobi Hiruzen stared. If he was asked he would openly admit that right now he was more surprised than he had been in a very long time. In fact, the last time he had been this surprised was when Minato-kun had stated that he would have to take over as Hokage again, as the genius shinobi was about to die. Of course, that time he was more worried about the Kyuubi than he was about being Hokage and so couldn't really concentrate on why he was so shocked. But this time there were no convenient distractions. Naruto had just asked to be a ninja yet not a ninja. He'd just asked to learn shinobi techniques yet he didn't want to join the academy or become a Konoha shinobi. Why, Naruto? Why wouldn't you want to become a Konoha shinobi at the same time? You would be paid, and you would be able to look after yourself. Sarutobi really did not know what to make of this strange request. Obviously something had happened yesterday. The venerable ninja could easily decipher from Naruto's dejected look that something had caused him to change his dream of being Hokage. Jiji. I don't wanna protect this village anymore. I like you and Ichirakuji-san, but apart from that everyone's mean to me. I don't wanna protect people who treat me so bad. Obviously the boy was not being forthcoming on the finer details, Sarutobi mused. Sighing, he stood up from his desk, where the mountain of the morning's paperwork teetered dangerously over the edge. He thought about Naruto's request. He supposed he could start the boy on the basics of chakra if he really wanted it. God knows, the kid deserved to have ninja training more than anyone else, given his heritage and the life he had led so far. But to not want to be allied with the village. He didn't think anything like that had been done before. If I do teach you to be a shinobi, what will you do with the skills? If not to protect people, how would you put the knowledge to good use? Naruto's face scrunched up in concentration. It took him a good 30 seconds for his 4-year-old mind to grasp what the old Hokage meant, but when he did his face lit up. Sarutobi's heart lifted just by seeing the boy this happy after how down he had been just a minute before. Well yeah, see Jiji. I was thinking, see. And I thought if I could do all these cool tricks like jumping over buildings and running as fast as the wind then I could have loads of fun. Naruto was literally bouncing at this point in his excitement. He had obviously thought this through. Have fun? Naruto, ninja techniques are not for fun, they are used to protect people, to protect the will of fire that resides within all of the people in Konoha. You may think them fun now, but you will realize that these techniques can hurt people later on. Why would you want to hurt people if not to protect people from the ones that hurt them? Sarutobi didn't know if the boy would understand what he said, he was only 4 after all. Naruto's hair shadowed his eyes as he stared at his feet. When he raised his head, the Sandaime Hokage was once again surprised with the calculating look that creased the youngster's face. Jiji, why should I protect people who are always trying to hurt me? You always say about the will of fire, where's that fire when the people out there throw things at me? Where's that will of fire when no one wants to push me or play with me on the swings? Hajiji. Sarutobi paused, well that explains what happened yesterday then. Damn those villagers, can't they see a little child for what it is? It struck him how Naruto's demands were not truly such a big thing. If anything it would help him as the Konoha Council would not be able to overrule the Hokage if it was about civilian matters. The shinobi part of the council would not have a say and the civilian side would listen to anything their Hokage told them. No, if anything, this was a present for the Hokage. Danzo wouldn't be able to pressurize him any longer on having Naruto entered into the root program if he wasn't a shinobi. It was safe to say that guilt was eating away at the old Hokage soul after Naruto's latest outburst. Also, it couldn't hurt to teach the boy about some of the harmless things a shinobi learned. There were many civilians who had some training in the ninja arts, especially the students who didn't manage to graduate from the academy, or were taken from the roster due to debilitating injuries. Alright, Naruto. I'll teach you some things, but if you get hurt or hurt other people then I am going to stop. Are we clear on that? Naruto's head whipped up from where it had fallen to staring at the floor again. His face split by a wide grin as he cheered. Woohoo! I'm gonna learn all these cool moves and have loads of fun all my life. Some of Sarutobi's guilt disappeared when he heard that proclamation. At least he wouldn't regret this decision. Now listen closely, Naruto, this is what ninja need to know. Naruto grinned devilishly. Oh, this was gonna be good. He had scoped out the Akimichi food house earlier and everything was prepared. If all went well, he'd be home free before 3 p.m. and no one would be any wiser. He almost let out a cacophony of evil laughter to suit the mood but instead settled for a quiet giggle. It wouldn't do for him to be caught, right? Over the last year or so, Naruto had been learning a few ninja techniques. He had managed to draw on his chakra and Jiji had taught him the leaf hovering control exercise. He hadn't fully mastered it yet, but he could move his chakra to most parts of his body. His feet, however, were still unable to hold chakra, but Jiji had said that it was the hardest point to focus chakra in the body. He had also managed a decent henge and could pull the Kawarimi no Jutsu off flawlessly. No matter how hard he tried though, he couldn't do the Bunshin no Jutsu. Ah well, practice makes perfect. And with that, he focused chakra to his legs and leapt off the building that he had been sitting on. It was close to noon and most of the Akimichi clan would be out at their favorite places of repast, and so this was the best time for him to carry out his self-appointed mission. As he ran and jumped the small distances between the roofs of the Konoha buildings, he couldn't jump very far yet, so he had to settle for jumping to the nearest building each time. He pondered on why the Sandaime wouldn't teach him any more than the 3 jutsu he had been practicing for the last year. Yeesh. The jutsu he gave me aren't very fun. Look at the amount of work I have to do to make them interesting. Truth be told, he was enjoying himself, but the true joy came after the deed, or so they say. Naruto was one to agree. Landing on the street floor once again, he quickly hid himself on the nearest house corner he could find. Usually the Akimichi were so focused on getting to their meals that they didn't pay any attention to their surroundings. No, the main problem was getting into the clan house. He would have to make sure that he wasn't caught then. Checking that the coast was clear, he ran as fast as his 5-year-old legs could take him, through the hustle and bustle of one of Konoha's finer marketplaces. The sound of yelling and advertisement reached his ears as he pounded down the cobblestone street, keeping a wary eye out for anyone acting suspicious. He nearly snorted at that. If anyone was acting suspicious, it was him. As he cleared a large crowd of villagers who were waiting their turn at one of the more upstanding restaurants, he sighted the Akimichi clan house ahead. It was a modestly large building, nowhere near as big as, say, the Uchiha or Hyuga estates, and was decked out in reds and browns. The mahogany and maroon doors stood large and imposing, with the Akimika's trademark swirl painted smoothly on each side. No matter, he definitely was not going through the front. Stopping close to the front of the house, Naruto made his way down a side alley and spied exactly what he was looking for. There was a pile of delivery crates stacked almost as high as the first floor, very close to a window. Deftly scaling the boxes, he reached for the latch of the window, but his 5-year-old body was not quite large enough to bridge the distance. Naruto leaned over and just as the pile was about to fall, sprang to the window ledge and unlatched the window. This was careless security, having a latch on the outside of a house, but then again the Akimichi thought they had nothing to hide. Oh, how wrong they were. Just as Naruto found himself inside a sparsely furnished room, he encountered his first obstacle of his sort of mission. The crates had leaned too far over and had crashed to the ground. Ducking his head, he waited for the response of the villagers. What was that? He heard the pattering of running feet and then silence. Ah, the crates fell over. Must have been a cat? No matter, we'll inform Chaoza as soon as he gets back, they may need them for a delivery later. After all, Naruto listened intently as the voices moved away. He almost chuckled again. Little did they know that the crates were the least of their problems. He had to move quickly though, wouldn't want those idiotic villagers telling the Fatzos before he was clear of this place. Padding over to the only door in the room, he cracked it open and peeked out. He was just outside some kind of hallway on the first floor, but he needed to get to the basement. Hopefully there wasn't anyone lounging around downstairs. Silently he moved out once again, this time keeping on his tiptoes and sticking close to the walls. He found the stairs at the end of the hallway and silently slipped down to the ground floor. Luckily for him, the stairs to the basement led directly off the ground floor, so he didn't hesitate. Reaching the ground floor, he shook with silent laughter as he looked upon his objective, the Akimichi Cutthroat Special, a recipe of great culinary importance that every Akimichi knew by heart. Standing on the dresser, were several bowls of the delicacy just waiting to be eaten by any of the Akimichi who would be eating lunch at home today. Silently he crept over to the veritable stash and pulled out a black and crimson bottle of Maker's legendary chili. Oh, this was going to be good. Liberally emptying the contents into each bowl, he screwed the cap back on and made ready to leave. Just as he reached the top of the stairway of the first floor, he froze. He had been caught. Like a rabbit caught in headlights, he bolted for the same room he had come in from. The round-bellied Akimichi that stood in front of him, decked out in a sort of green samurai armor, bellowed and made to follow. Naruto slammed all his weight into the door, but was left dazed as the Akimichi scrambled up the stairs. Naruto, in his brief glance back, noticed a Konoha headband tied around the right bicep of the clinically obese ninja. Darn. At least a genin then. Naruto slammed his frame into the door another 3 times before the ringing in his head caused him to stop. The Akimichi almost upon him, he had an epiphany. The handle. Turning the handle quickly, the door opened inwards and Naruto collapsed into the room, slamming the door shut after him. Haha fatty. You'll never catch me. Learn to climb over your belly before you try the stairs. He yelled at the door and then sprinted to the window. This time he had no inhibitions. Wrenching the latch open, he dived out, onto the fallen pile of delivery crates that splintered as he hit them, yet cushioned his fall. As he moved to stand up, he felt and heard the door to the first floor room explode, large chunks of the previously solid wooden entrance shooting out of the open window and impacting with the wall of the neighboring building. How dare you call me fatty? I'm not fat, I'm big-boned, you rat. When I get you I will pulverize you. Well, that didn't sound too good to Naruto, so he brushed himself off and made for the alleyway exit. Uh-oh. That is not good. Having underestimated just how big the gap in skill a genin had over him, Naruto had expected the massive ninja to take a few more seconds to get out the window, but alas, the Akimichi was faster than his expansive girth portrayed. He stood at the front of the alley with his limbs akimbo, which made for a frightening sight due to the imposing chubby belly hanging loosely from the front of the ninja's armor. If only he could regulate his chakra to his feet, it would be far more effective than just bolstering his leg muscles. It was just typical that the genin knew the one skill that would give him the advantage in such a situation. As the adrenaline in his system roared through his veins, Naruto smiled. At least this guy wouldn't recognize him with the ridiculous get-up he had on. He had ditched his white t-shirt and black pants for dark blue hose pants and a jet black sweatshirt. Wrapped around his head was a black scarf that hid his face up to his eyes, and along with the open bandana he had covering his hair, he was sure that no one could recognize him as the blonde anathema that was Uzumaki Naruto. And anyway, he had the henge as his last resort, which he was planning on using, but right now he needed the other jutsu in his arsenal. The Akimichi genin charged towards him, cocking his fist back to punch the small blonde in the face. Unfortunately, he smashed a delivery crate into pieces. He lunged again, only to get a wooden crate in the face. Again and again he attempted to get the black-covered brat in any way he could, and every time he hit another wooden crate. Finally, after his fists were severely abused and his face red with fury, he managed to get to within a meter of the small imposter. Taking the chance, he launched forward in a crude but devastating headbutt. Naruto smirked as he made the seal for the Kawarimi once again. Boy, was this fun. The Akimichi slammed headfirst into an iron beam that had been buried under all the crates, but had been unearthed as Naruto constantly switched with them. The Akimichi stood for a full 20 seconds, comically lumbering from side to side as he strove to keep his consciousness. Finally he collapsed, out like a light. Naruto was panting hard. He had used most of his chakra reserves for that little stunt, but it had been worth it. He figured he had just enough chakra remaining for a solid henge, but first he had one more opportunity he just couldn't pass up. Leaning down to the collapsed ninja's face, he pulled a permanent marker from his small hip pouch. It was a standard issue the Hokage had given him to keep his money in. Quickly, he scribbled a word on each of the Akimika's cheeks and then the same on the ninja's back. Cackling, he righted himself and made the seals for the henge no jutsu. Mission accomplished. Now he just needed a place to watch the fireworks. All was normal in the busy market square outside the Grand Akimichi clan house. Passers-by stopped to admire the red and brown regalia that adorned every inch of the building, some openly expressing awe and admiration for the clan's tastes. The first sign that anything was wrong inside the building was a slight rumbling accompanied by a high-pitched whining. As it grew steadily louder, many of the villagers turned to see if they could catch a glimpse of what was making the noise. It seemed to come from the Akimichi clan house. Now that was absurd. Just as the volume reached an unbearable peak, the compound's doors were almost blown off their hinges as four of the infamously round Akimichis tumbled out onto the street, their mouths hanging open, their eyes bulging and tears streaming down their cheeks. Steam rose comically from their ears as they moaned and screamed at the unbearable sensation they were undoubtedly experiencing in their mouths. Almost immediately, the whole square was in chaos. A good majority of the shoppers didn't wait to find out if it was an attack or something else, they simply dropped whatever was in their hands and ran for home. A small group of alarmed villagers raced to the Akimichis and attempted to find out what was wrong. One brave but stupid villager actually put his hand on the shoulder of the first Akimichi to burst out into the square. Needless to say, the result was explosive. Chilayayayayayayin. The Akimichi bellowed as his hand expanded to a larger size and swatted the poor villager away, sending him flying down the street like a rocket. From his hiding place, Naruto felt the displacement of air left in the slipstream of the man's unorthodox flight ruffle his clothing as he rolled around on the floor, barely keeping his laughter to a quiet level so as not to be overheard by anyone. The four then proceeded to obliterate the square with ridiculously proportioned limbs in their chili-induced stupor, and Naruto, having seen enough to ensure he had a hilarious memory lodged in the back of his skull, turned and made his way back to Konoha's forest. He ripped his scarf from his face and deactivated the henge. About a minute later he heard another bellow of rage float over him. "I'm not fat. Where are you, you skinny little freak?" Naruto almost choked on his tongue. Guess he woke up then. Throwing his head back, he laughed to the heavens. That was fun. It had been 2 days since Naruto's excursion into the Akimichi clan house. Suffice to say, he didn't think he was going to do something like that anytime soon. So instead, he decided to dedicate himself to something that he knew he could do which didn't have such a high percentage injury and or death rate. Like suicide jumping off Hokage Mountain. Since he only knew 2 jutsu and a little about chakra control, he decided he would make use of them in the most fun way he could think of. Like suicide jumping off Hokage Mountain. The theory was, that if you were proficient enough with the Kawarimi no Jutsu, you could switch yourself with anything that was in your line of sight. Hokage had informed him when he had taught him the jutsu that to switch yourself with larger objects, you need more chakra but less control. Naturally that meant the smaller the object, the less chakra was needed, yet a more refined control was required. Frustrated that Sarutobi had refused to teach him any other jutsu for the foreseeable future, Naruto decided to test his limits by suicide jumping off Hokage Mountain. He figured that the further away from the object, the higher amount of chakra and control would be needed, and this was an additional rule to what Jiji had told him. So he decided to take it slow. Taking in a deep breath, he jumped off of Hokage Mountain. As he plummeted towards the ground from directly below the Yondame's stone head, which he had just jumped off of, he quickly made the seal for the Kawarimi whilst locking onto the medium-sized planks of wood he had managed to haul up to the monument. In a puff of smoke he found himself once again on the Yondame's head and peered over the edge of its nose to see the plank of wood he had switched himself with, falling to the ground. That was fun, just a bit too short. Let's try a bit further this time. Again, he jumped off of the Yondame's head and let out a joyous laugh as he felt the G-force dragging against his body. This time he lasted for a full 5 seconds before forming the seal for the Kawarimi and was once again replaced by a plank of wood. This time he felt his chakra pool decrease slightly and sweat beading his forehead. TCH, still too short, screw these, I'm gonna go 3/4 soft he wait his time. Steeling himself, Naruto got ready to jump once again. Plunging into the warm Konoha air, he felt the euphoria associated with flying. I wonder if the Shishoa bird feels when it flies. Whooping loudly, he brought his hands up to perform the Kawarimi. He suddenly noticed that from his rapidly descending angle, he could no longer see the planks of wood that he needed to perform the jutsu. Oh, this is bad. Closing his eyes for the impact, he curled himself tight into a ball and attempted to maneuver his body into a better position to minimize the damage that would be inflicted when he collided with the ground. Damn, if only I could stick to else I could just reach me feet out and stop miffle. Resigned, he gulped in the rushing air. 50 feet. 40. 30. 10. Suddenly, something caught him in mid-air and Naruto felt the drag from changing direction at such a high speed. Well, at least he wasn't lying in a pool of blood at the bottom of the mountain. Naruto felt the jolt of whatever caught him landing on the ground. Through his adrenaline-hazed senses he realized that it was a person that had caught him, and not just any old person, it was an Umbu. Naruto. Just what the hell did you think you were doing? Naruto turned his head to the left to see Sandaime Jiji glaring at him through his labored breathing. Turning to stare up at his savior, he spied a shock of spiked silver hair and the Inu Umbu mask. Turning back to the Hokage he grinned. Yo Jiji. Cause you only taught me 2 jutsu, I was trying to see how far I could Kawarimi whilst bungee jumping. You wanna try? It's real fun. The Hokage recoiled at hearing Naruto's declaration. You mean to tell me that you were jumping off of the Hokage mountain for fun? The Hokage's face was by now apoplectic with rage. Well, yeah. When I was pulling my stunt at the Akimikas the other day, I had this idea from replacing myself so many times, see, and so decided to, oops. Naruto slapped a hand over his mouth. He just spilled the beans. So it was you at the Akimichi clan house? I should have known it would be you. I did not teach you ninja techniques for you to cause chaos in this village, Naruto. Can't you remember what I told you about what those jutsu are for? Naruto lowered his head, allowing his hair to shadow his eyes. The arms that held him tightened slightly in a more protective hold. Surprised, Naruto looked back up into the Umbu's face but was met with the stoic mask leering back down at him. Shaking himself, Naruto faced the Hokage once again. But Jiji. It ain't my fault that ya only taught me these 2 boring jutsu. I wanted to do something fun and that was the only thing I could think of at the time. I can't even do that stupid clone technique. It never comes out right no matter how hard I try. The Hokage sighed. He distantly realized that he had been doing that a lot more frequently these days. At least he had something to say to the Akimichi now, although being honest with himself, he would never name Naruto as the culprit. The boy had too many enemies already to add more to the list. Look, Naruto, we'll discuss this in my office. You should just think about how scared I was when I looked out of my window and saw you jumping off that mountain. Inu, bring him to my office. With an immediate "hi, Hokage-sama," all three disappeared in a shower of leaves. Naruto snickered evilly into his hand as he walked to his new apartment place that the Hokage had given to him. Once he inquired into why he was not at the orphanage when the Hokage had attempted to locate him after the Akimichi incident. Sarutobi was shocked when he found out that the caretakers were regularly kicking Naruto onto the street at night and that Naruto was being forced to sleep in the forests surrounding the village. As he walked, he clutched the two new scrolls that he was given by his Jiji. Apparently, one was a control exercise, and the other was a jutsu that allowed him to maximize his chakra output so that it would be easier for the Hokage to find him if he was in trouble. Naruto, however, had a very different use for the jutsu, and he was planning on mastering the technique as soon as possible. He was quite surprised when the Umbu had commented on his reaction time. When Inu was asked to report what he had seen, he had replied, "It was shocking, Hokage-sama. Not only did he manage to replace himself with a plank of wood from over 100 feet away, he also did this whilst falling at roughly 50 meters per second. I thought that was incredible, but he also managed to maneuver himself into a position that would cause minimal damage if he was to hit the ground." Naruto felt himself glowing on the inside. Not only did an Umbu say something about him, but also, it was something good. He would be sure to remember this Inu in the future. Maybe he could give him some pointers with his chakra control and then he'd be able to tree jump. As soon as he got to his new apartment, he locked the door, chucked his sandals into a corner of the living room and unrolled the chakra control scroll. Or maybe he didn't need any pointers after all. Naruto's grin reached to the corner of his jaw. He rubbed his hands together in childish glee. "Oh, this is gonna be good." And cut. There you have it. Bonus chapter, and it was longer than the other two. I really had fun writing this chapter because I had been waiting to use my bungee jumping ninja style idea for ages. This one just wrote itself. But gasp. What is the chakra control technique? As if no one is going to guess. And what does Naruto plan to use this jutsu for? All that next time, if there is a next time. Crying face, on Konoha, Naruto's playground. Sarutobi rubbed the bridge of his nose lightly as he stared down at the mission report resting lightly in his hands. In front of him, stood three of the utmost trustworthy ninja in the Konoha Umbu ranks, as today, was a day of treason and treachery. Hebai, Itachi, you are totally sure that everything in this report is 100% accurate? The two young nin nodded their heads. This spelt bad things for the Konoha military. If it was so easy for someone to infiltrate their forces and remain undetected for so long, Sarutobi no longer knew how trustworthy his forces were. At least the three in front of him could be counted on. So let me get this straight, the recently promoted Shuyunin, Mizuki, made contact with Orochimaru for the first time whilst on mission code FC-1189. Incidentally, the third teammate of the Genin squad assigned to the mission died, and Mizuki returned as a loyalist to Orochimaru's rebel movement. Since then, he has avoided contact in order to prevent suspicion and had only now made an attempt to procure new orders. Sarutobi frowned. Something didn't quite add up. "Hi, Hokage-sama. We received a tip-off at 1800 hours last night from Chuyunin Iwashi Tatama. He noticed Mizuki approaching an off-limits area that he was assigned to patrol duty. You'll find the details in the mission report for FC 2767. Umbu Squad D was called and we observed Mizuki making contact with an unidentified ninja. He had no credentials to support him being of another village, however he carried standard shinobi equipment. We overheard their conversation, the details of which you can find in the report. It still amazed Sarutobi how Itachi managed to say all that without any change in either volume or tone. Poor boy, no one should be forced to grow up so fast, but then again, the Hokage was being faced with a similar problem with regards to a certain blonde-headed pariah. Turning back to the report, he quickly scanned the page to find the conversation he was interested in, and narrowed his eyes at what had been discussed. Here are your orders: don't reply, don't attempt to make contact, and most of all don't tell anyone about this conversation. Orochimaru-sama will not be pleased if you fail in your task, so do not hesitate to remove anyone that stands in your way. Your objective is to obtain the Forbidden Scroll of Seals located in the Hokage's office under a genjutsu on a shelf to the left-hand side of the room. Once you have secured the scroll, move to Sector 5 and await reinforcements. I cannot stress how important it is that you make no attempt to establish contact. If you get there, we will contact you. Not good at all. There were definitely other elements besides Mizuki acting with impunity here, but the whole thing definitely stank of Orochimaru. Few people knew where the Scroll of Seals was located, and although an A-class genjutsu was used to hide it, the nature of the genjutsu was such that only if you didn't know the location, it would be effective. So definitely Orochimaru then. It hit the venerable Hokage then what was making him uneasy. Why would Mizuki switch sides? What was his motive to join an infamous missing nin like Orochimaru? He would find out, but right now, national security was at risk. Striding to the aforementioned bookshelf, Sarutobi released the genjutsu on the scroll and moved it to the Yondame's safe. Signaling the three Umbu to listen, he spoke in hushed tones. Inu, Itachi, Hebai, Code 54 read. You know which genjutsu that is, so apply a triple layer on the scroll before I shut the safe. The three Umbu were inwardly shocked that Sarutobi had enough trust in them to place a genjutsu on an object so important as to warrant a place in the Yondame's safe. Nevertheless, they quickly made the hand seals, and whispered in unison. Magan, Kokanai Rezu no Jutsu. The air above the scroll swirled until it was replaced by a folder. Sarutobi shut the safe and sealed it with his blood, before covering the door with a genjutsu sheet. Now that that is out of the way, we need to neutralize this threat before it has a chance to move. Hebai, Itachi, your mission will be to eliminate the traitor Mizuki at once. He is not to make contact with anyone outside his home. I want him taken out before sunrise. You will also need to make sure he cannot escape from his house. I'll leave you to think up the most appropriate method. Next to them, the Umbu in the Inu mask twitched slightly. It seems like you have something to say, Captain. The Hokage's senses were still very sharp after all. If I may make a suggestion, Hokage-sama, at Sarutobi's deft nod, he continued. I recently witnessed Uzumaki Naruto use the chakra beacon technique in a very unique way, and think that he would be the ideal solution to confining Mizuki. Sarutobi raised an eyebrow at that. What could Naruto offer for this situation that the Umbu couldn't? Taking that as his response to continue, the elite ninjas spoke again. During my patrol of the Academy district last week, I encountered a large surge of chakra. I immediately noticed that it was the chakra of Uzumaki Naruto, as did you, Hokage-sama, and a few ninja who were on patrol nearby. It was not this that shocked me though. When I arrived on the scene, I noticed a phenomenon that I had never encountered before. Naruto was practicing with the chakra beacon technique, and when he had let out the pulse, he managed to spread the beacon widely enough that I was unable to place his exact location. If he were to do this when Mizuki attempts to escape, the traitor will be hard-pressed to guard his back, and we should be able to eliminate him without trouble. To say that Sarutobi was surprised would be a gross understatement. The control required to pull off the chakra beacon was practically non-existent. Shinobi had been using the technique for years as a useful locator on the field, and any ninja who had been present in the Third Shinobi War would be able to pull it off without any trouble whatsoever. All you had to do was push your chakra out of your body as hard as you can, and bingo, immediate beacon for any ninja, friend, or foe, within the vicinity. The thing about the technique though, was that you could not control your chakra once it escaped the body. In this way the Hyuga were able to push their chakra out of specific points of their chakra's circulatory systems, but that required a huge amount of control. Similarly, it was possible to slow the flow of chakra to such speeds that you became invisible to surrounding shinobi. But what Naruto had supposedly done, was to spread his chakra to every chakra pore in his body and release it at the same intensity as that of his chakra flow, and so in effect, cause shinobi to become confused as to where his body was. This was, to say the least, very impressive. Seems like he had earned a few more techniques on his next meeting with the Hokage. Smiling, Sarutobi nodded his head. It was a good plan. Even if Mizuki saw Naruto, he wouldn't be able to pinpoint where the beacon was coming from, and it was very unlikely that he would suspect a 6-year-old child of being responsible for such a feat. Okay, that's a good plan. In that case, Inu, you are responsible for this operation. Hebai, you are to find and recruit Naruto without letting him know of your true intentions. Do not allow him to find out that this is a mission. Make something up, I don't care, but he is not to find out that he is being used in such a way. Understood? Move out. With a crisp "Hi, Hokage-sama," all three disappeared from the office. Sarutobi sighed. If Naruto found out, it would not do at all. Naruto smiled happily. He couldn't believe his luck. That snake-masked Umbu had said that she wanted to test his chakra beacon and tree-walking abilities. And he knew it was a woman. No man had such a high voice. He was giddy, and he knew it. He knew it would affect his performance in the upcoming test, but he just couldn't help it. He had been practicing so hard in the half-year or so since Hokage Chiji had given him the 2 scrolls. To think that the Hokage had given him the very skill he wanted in the tree climbing control exercise, was the icing on the cake. He had swiftly learned how to channel his chakra to his feet and run up walls. He enjoyed it so much that it was a common sight to see the blonde-haired Jinchuriki jumping from rooftop to rooftop as fast as his small legs could take him. Shaking himself, Naruto remembered that he had a test to pass. It wouldn't do to mess this one up. The Umbu had told him to sit on a bench outside one of Konoha's shinobi residence areas. It was one of the few places that Naruto had hardly ever been to within Konoha, and he couldn't help but notice how the buildings were far better than his apartment. Maybe there are good things about being a Konoha ninja. Before he could think further on it though, a puff of smoke announced the arrival of his examiner. "All right kid, this is how we're gonna do things. I'm gonna be hiding up there, and when I give the signal you're gonna use your jutsu and I'll evaluate it." The masked nin pointed to a tree that was heavily shadowed about 10 meters from Naruto's position on the bench. "Remember, you have to remain sitting on that bench and act as if you're not the one doing the technique. You understand my explanation for why that technique is so unique, right?" Naruto nodded. He had been informed that by spreading his chakra he was, in effect, making it harder for ninja to be able to sense him. He already knew he rocked. As the Umbu disappeared, Naruto couldn't help but think that he wasn't being told something. Why would this Umbu suddenly want to test him? It wasn't as if Umbu went around testing everyone they thought could do something unique, did they? Weren't they supposed to be like the super ninja in Konoha? Ah well, better keep my eyes open. And with that, he plopped himself down on the bench and turned to stare at the living quarters in front of him. It was almost as if the Umbu had chosen this bench so that he was facing that building when he did the technique. He quickly shook himself. It wouldn't do to fail this after so much hard work. Mizuki was scared. Scratch that, he was downright terrified. The first clue he had that something was very wrong was that he could sense 3 chakra signatures outside his apartment, and they didn't seem to be going away. Now usually that wasn't a cause for concern, it was a shinobi residency area after all, but the thing that alerted him was that 2 of the chakra signature were definitely Umbu. Umbu had their own living quarters separate from the other residential areas, so that if any of them flipped out and went on a killing spree due to the stress of their missions getting to them, it was easily contained. He had decided it was too risky to stick around, so without further ado, he gathered as much of his essentials that he could move on short notice, and prepared to leave. Then everything went to hell. Mitarashi Anko, Takubutsu-jounin, codenamed Hebai in the Umbu Black Ops, sat waiting for Itachi's signal. She spied the blonde kid out of her peripheral vision as she watched the apartment door, senses stretched to their maximum. He was a strange one, that Uzumaki Naruto. He could do things other people couldn't, and he was still very innocent. She was hard-pressed to understand what the villagers saw in him that warranted their ostracism. As she snuck another glance at the kid, she remembered Sandame's warning. Hebai, you are to find and recruit Naruto without letting him know of your true intentions. Do not allow him to find out that this is a mission. Make something up, I don't care, but he is not to find out that he is being used in such a way. Understood. Anko grimaced. If the Hokage had worries about Naruto's state of mind regarding Konoha, she didn't think it was a wise choice to have him on this mission. She knew what it was like to bear the brunt of the villagers' hate, and he wasn't the only one who didn't want to help the village. They were both being forced into it. The thing is, nothing ever went to plan with Umbu missions. The reason they were Umbu was because they could adapt to any given situation and still come out on top of their opponents. If something went wrong here, Naruto would very likely find out that he was being used. And she didn't know how well that would sit with the Kuwabai kid. She didn't have any more time to ponder the situation though, as the mission finally got started. It was just after midnight when Itachi's clone popped up beside the purple-headed Umbu. Target confirmed, moving for the exit. Proceed with stage 2 at your discretion. The clone popped out of existence as quickly as it had come. Anko sighed. Well, it was damned if you do, damned if you don't. Mizuki knew the game was up. The Umbu had appeared in the hallway of his lodging and booted the door off its hinges in an explosive show of strength. As the splinters zoomed everywhere, colliding with the walls, Mizuki heard the monotonous voice that emitted from behind the elite ninja's mask. Ex-Chuyunin Mizuki, you have been confirmed as a traitor to the hidden village of the Leaves. As per order of Sarutobi Hiruzen, the Sandame Hokage of Konoha, you are condemned to immediate execution. The morbid finality of the statement caused Mizuki's anxiety to rise. He was already forming seals before the Umbu had finished speaking. Kawarimi no Jutsu. Mizuki replaced himself with a chair in the hallway and immediately made a break for the front door. He couldn't sense the other Umbu, maybe they had decided he wasn't worth 2 Umbu. He would show them. He could still sense the small chakra levels of the other person, but they were too low to be anything higher than genin. It was most probably someone who wasn't involved in his execution. Mizuki almost stopped in surprise when the small chakra was replaced by a much larger one right outside the door. Worse still, he couldn't pinpoint where it was coming from. It was like 100 Chuyunin had suddenly appeared and spread themselves evenly outside the apartment complex, but that was impossible. He had been so caught up in analyzing the massive chakra signature in front of him that he had almost completely forgotten about the one behind him he was originally escaping from. It was only luck that saved him as he snapped his head round, barely missing the standard issue Umbu katana hissing by the right side of his head. If the blade had hit home, everything would have been fine. Alas, Anko's suspicions were correct. Mizuki backpedaled into the front door, forming seals as fast as he could. He could either fight this Umbu here, or face whatever it was that was outside. He'd pick 100 Chuyunin over an Umbu any day of the week. Slamming his hands into the door, he called out the best technique he had in his arsenal. Doton, Doryu Dango no Jutsu. Mizuki tore the chunk of wood from the door and hurled it at the masked shinobi, before throwing himself through the hole that he had made. Mizuki immediately began running toward the border of the village. He had to get out as fast as he could, since he had been compromised. As he ran, he glanced about wildly, trying to find the enormous chakra signature that was choking the air. It was like he was being surrounded. As he continued running, he spied a kid dressed in black pants and a dark blue t-shirt sitting on a bench. It was the Kuwabai brat. That was probably the cause of the chakra distortion he was feeling, although it looked like he was just sitting there. In any case, his orders were to get rid of anyone in his way, so he snapped a kunao into his hand and got ready to throw. Just as the kid looked up, his eyes widening, the traitor stopped dead in his tracks. He glanced down to see the point of a katana poking out of the front of his chest. He knew he was dead. In his last few breaths in the living world, he raised his head up and stared at the blonde kid that thwarted him, as blood pooled behind his eyeballs, trickling out of his nose and the corner of his mouth. As he slipped off the blade, he whispered his last word to the stunned kid. Demon. Damn, damn, damn. Anko cursed herself over and over as she leapt down to where Itachi had pulled his sword from the traitorous Chuyunin's back, splattering the blood all over himself and the blonde Uzumaki. The kid looked like he was hyperventilating, staring wide-eyed at the blood splattered on his hands. He was visibly shaking, and Anko knew he would soon go into shock. It was only then that the Takubutsu Jounin found that there was a much larger problem. Naruto was still spewing the beacon technique like a fountain of water. Not good, not good at all. The end. LOL. Just kidding, people. As you can see, the reviews from yesterday gave me so much happiness that I went ahead and typed out a chapter almost double the length of the last one. Hope everyone enjoys reading it as much as I enjoyed typing. Next chapter should be much lighter than this one, but we will begin to see Naruto's outlook on life. Just as things were beginning to look up for him too. Anyway, small button equals click equals type review. Sarutobi strode with an agitated gait, as he hurried through the hospital hallways. The report from the latest Umbu mission was damning to say the least. The mission was successful, yes, but the damage inflicted may far outweigh the long-term potential gains of such an audacious move. Naruto was in a highly volatile situation. He had witnessed the demise of the traitorous Konoha Chuyunin Mizuki, and from the report, seemed to have realized that he had been used. Hebai herself had reported in on the Jinchuriki's status, and it wasn't looking good. The professionals at the Konoha Central Hospital had concisely reported that the shock from such a revelation from one of the few people of trust to the boy was enough to seriously damage the psychological framework of his brain. Furthermore, he had expended a huge amount of chakra, and Hebai was unable to get him to stop before he collapsed in chakra exhaustion. The venerable Hokage didn't know what would happen to a Jinchuriki that expended all of his chakra. But that hadn't been the worst thing, by a long shot. It seemed that the chakra beacon technique had some unforeseen abilities when one such as Naruto used it. After whittling down his own small chakra pool, he had begun to draw on the Kuwabai's chakra. As more of the volatile crimson energy was pulled out, the jutsu maximized to even greater heights. What followed was a rush of murderous intent, so strong, that the entire village was once again brought to its knees by the sheer magnitude and hate. At least it wasn't directed at anyone, but Hiruzen knew that that was no concession. The deluge of despicably loathing intent caused mass panic and chaos to spread like lightning through the village. The danger level was immediately upgraded to code red emergency status, and a contingency of Umbu had been dispatched to locate the source, as if nobody knew who it was. It was then that a stray thought struck Sarutobi. What if Naruto was able to control the effect of that technique? It would truly become a formidable skill for a shinobi to have. Sarutobi shook himself, reminding that Naruto no longer had any care for becoming a Konoha shinobi, let alone using those skills for the good of the village. They were in this situation because they had tried to force his hand. It was just typical that Minato-san would be the type to bite people in the back when confronted with such a situation. Stopping outside room 47, the Hokage hesitated slightly before pushing the door open and walking inside. Naruto sat on the surgical bed bound in bandages, from his head to his toes. If Sarutobi hadn't known the complexity and seriousness of the issue at hand, he would have laughed uproariously at the comical sight presented to him. Yet this was not a time for comedy. How are you feeling, Naruto? Sarutobi winced at how the question must have sounded to the blonde-headed bundle of energy. Naruto slowly turned his head to look at his grandfather figure. His sapphire eyes that usually sparkled with mischief and joy were dull and lifeless. His very expression spoke volumes of his psychological state, and Sarutobi was beginning to wonder if there was anything salvageable from this tragedy. I'm fine. His reply was curt. Not a good sign. I don't mean physically, Naruto. How are you really feeling? Sarutobi wanted to know his opinion on the events that had occurred the previous morning. Much better than that guy in the cemetery. Sarutobi winced again. So he definitely knew they had used him then. Naruto, you have to understand. We needed that job done. It was for the safety of the village. Can you really put your own protection over those of Dash? Gigi. Don't trick me. Everyone knows that the villagers hate me. Why the hell should I protect them? Why the hell should I even believe a single thing you say to me? The boy's heartfelt question pierced the Hokage's heart like a lightning bolt. Sarutobi was hard-pressed to say he understood the trauma that the 6-year-old was going through. The only person in the whole village, who may have been able to claim such a thing, was Itachi, and that was only if you got him to say something outside of his family time or missions. Sarutobi shook himself from his musings once again. When the old Hokage finally responded to the blonde, who hadn't looked away from, or even blinked at, his Jiji's lowered head, his voice had dropped to little more than a whisper. Because your father did. Naruto's eyes widened in shock and Sarutobi thought he saw a small spark revive in the blonde's blue eyes. What? Sarutobi knew that by affirming that, he was practically asking for trouble, but it seemed like the only way to get the boy out of his funk. I'm not going to tell you who your parents are. I hope you understand that we have reasons, your parents and I, why we are unable to tell you. But let me tell you one thing, your father sacrificed his life for this village, as did your mother. It was incredibly underhanded for the Sandaime to say such a thing when Naruto was in a trough of an emotional whirlwind, and yet he knew that it was his only chance if he was to defuse this situation. I respected your choice to not become a ninja. I gave you the tools to protect yourself from the mindless hatred directed at you, and yet I never questioned your intentions, Naruto. Are you questioning mine? Sarutobi didn't stop to consider if that was a fair question to ask a 6-year-old. At the moment, all he could see was the Yondaime's sole remaining progeny, one of outstanding strength and resiliency, and it was then that the veteran shinobi knew that Naruto would pull through this crisis. Respect. The word was spoken so softly that Hiruzen almost didn't catch it. You think you respected me, you didn't respect me. You gave me the lamest skills that every ninja knows. You made me live in that orphanage for 5 years, Gigi. I respected you. And you threw that in my face? You knew I didn't want to be a shinobi, and now look, Gigi, I have blood on my hands. Naruto's voice fell to a whisper once again, like the small sound of a passing breeze on a warm summer's day. I have blood on my hands. Sarutobi felt his heart wrench in his chest as Naruto raised his hands to look at them. His eyes were wide and trembling, and his whole body shook like a wooden training post as a look of pure grief and terror settled onto the child's face. Tears welled up and slipped over the edge of his eyelids, and he immediately scrunched his face up and buried his head in his hands. You think I'm stupid, don't you, Gigi? You think I don't know about that bad red stuff inside me? I know that's why the villagers call me monster. I saw the color of his blood and it was the same color as that stuff. His whole body was shaking now, and Sarutobi was straining to hang on to every word that came out of his mouth. Why do you think I wanted to learn ninja techniques? To make myself forget about this. He let forth a gut-wrenching sob. I wanted to forget this feeling. This loneliness and sadness. I didn't want to be sad anymore. I didn't want to wake up in the morning with the picture of people shouting at me, or throwing things at me in my head over and over again. Can't you see why I don't want to remember all this? Can't you see Jiji? Naruto's eyes were beginning to bulge, red lines of tiredness and madness stretching almost to his iris. Sarutobi registered this as a bad sign. He realized it then, what Naruto truly wanted. He had wanted it all his life, but had ruthlessly bottled it up in his heart for the sake of the survival of his sanity. It was also then that Sarutobi realized just how bad Jinchuriki's lives could be. The pain and emotional suffering that a human could go through was epitomized by their existences and experiences. And Naruto faced all of that with very little support. He was indeed his mother and father's son. Sarutobi rushed forward and enveloped the youngster in a tight hug. He realized now what the boy had been trying to tell him these past 2 years. His happiness and joy was only a facade to hide the very nature of his existence hurting those around him. He was trying to shield everyone from the pain he felt from having no parents, from being scorned from nearly every direction and most of all, from his own anger and confusion. But Sarutobi knew now. He knew what his intentions were all along, he just didn't recognize them for what they were. And damned he would be, if Sarutobi didn't support him. Naruto was stumped. Tree walking was easy. He did it in 2 days. Water walking was more difficult, it took him 4 days. But what he was trying to do now was causing far more trouble. The question was, would it be worth it? Tree walking regulated chakra to the feet, allowing a shinobi to stick himself to the surface. One would need to regulate a constant flow of the blue energy to the hardest part of the body, the feet, in order to strengthen the muscles and cause the foot to adhere to the tree. Trees were used as they were generally the hardest surfaces to build up this adhesion, due to their rough yet solid bark. Similarly, water walking built upon the basis of regulating chakra to one's feet, yet the principle behind it was quite different. The user had to constantly change the output of chakra to match the change of the surface, i.e. water. Water was especially good as a training site as it struck a balance between viscosity and volatility. The thing about water walking, was that when you needed to change direction you had to take into account how the water would move and how the chakra would cause a spray. Naruto had decided that, to maximize his training and enjoyment, he would ski, without skis. He had watched Konoha villagers water skiing using boats or hang gliders and he thought why not try a much more extreme version. He had chakra to burn and the mind to use it, although some people differed on the latter. So, here he was attempting to propel himself forward by pushing an insane amount of chakra out of his feet and ankles whilst trying to control his direction and balance at the same time. Suffice to say, the results were painful. Boom. Naruto gingerly extracted himself from the latest indent he had bashed into the rock from his latest collision. Wincing, he stretched himself checking for any injuries. That arm was going to be tender in the morning. Setting himself he got ready to try again. With an audible explosion of chakra, he rocketed forward, water parting up and in front of him creating a sparkling fountain of spray that caught the sunlight as it descended back to the river's surface. He was really enjoying himself this time. The feeling of the water slapping his skin under the sun as he blasted his path through the mammoth sentinels of water on either side of him put him in a state of euphoria he hadn't ever experienced before. He stared ahead, looking in awe at the golden sparkle of the sun, its rays reflecting magnificently off the diamonds of water drops hanging in the air around him. It was as if he was in a tunnel of silver and gold, each complementing the other in an unnatural balance that only something all-powerful could ever have created. In that moment of introspection, he once again lost his concentration. It was too late for him to slalom around the smooth curved rock that jutted out of the center of the river. With another deft boom, the blonde-haired Jinchuriki was lifted a sheer meter above the water's surface. With the wind from his ferocious speed dragging against his skin and the sound roaring past his ears, he yelled his challenge to the sky. Woohoo! And with that exclamation, after a good 3 seconds of hang time, he fell back to the surface with a resounding clap. His feet stinging and his body shaking from the adrenaline rush of the craziest move he had tried yet, he laughed uproariously. I have got to do that again. Alas, The wall didn't agree. Crack. Naruto was happy. It was the first and last thought on his mind at the moment. After a straight 6 days of practice, he had gotten the hang of the most dangerous sport he had ever decided to do. After the first 3 days, of which the afternoon was always spent in the hospital, he had strengthened his resolve to steady his balance and get it right. He deduced that to do this successfully, as he had seen on the Konoha beaches, he needed a source of tension to aid his balance. The conventional water skiers were always attached by rope to something that was pulling them across the river. However, there was a fundamental difference between their way and his. He was propelling himself across the surface, and so he didn't have anything to tie himself to. So he had decided that if he couldn't use something to speed him up to use for this tension, he would use something to slow himself down. Hence, the 10 kilograms rock that was tied to his waist with ninja wire. Using the basics of physics, this had allowed him to balance himself by leaning back into the tensile force acting on his body due to the inertia from the rock, effectively lowering his center of gravity and his speed, although the latter was only slight. Cackling madly, he shot off down his makeshift water course before slamming into his quasi-ramp of a rock and lifting himself airborne. It was fast becoming his favorite move, as the rush of the skiing with senses stretched to overload was suddenly replaced with a feeling of calm and solitude as he hung in the air. From his vantage point, he could see just beyond the edge of the waterfall that this particular river led to, the luscious green trees hanging down on either side as if inviting anyone to go through them. Naruto had neglected to notice a very big part of physics though, and it would cost him, or rather, anyone who was unfortunate enough to be walking around near the river at this very moment in time. You see, when a weight is tied behind a moving object, it moves at the same speed due to it having a physical bond to the momentum. However, when the moving object stops or slows down, the tension in the connection falls and the object being pulled continues at the same momentum at which it was originally. With an audible twang, Naruto glanced up as his axle rock went zooming over his head. Crap! I'm gonna get pulled along at this rate. It'll break me in half if I get caught in that. And so, flipping out a kunai stored in his 3/4s, he sliced the connection between himself and the rock. Naturally, that meant the rock was no longer tied to anything. The now unrestricted, airborne projectile zoomed away from him, angling out towards the tree line to the left of the river. Naruto heard a piercing shout before a solid thump was heard and moderate amount of dirt and stone exploded into the air above the tree line. Ouch! Naruto winced. That's gotta hurt. Quickly, he shot a burst of chakra to his feet and sped to where the stone had disappeared beyond the trees. Shaking himself, he ran as fast as he could to see if he had hurt anyone. Please let no one have died from that. Hurrying to the crater he had spied, he noticed a black, human-shaped lump lying on the ground. Shouting in worry, the blonde-headed daredevil ran as fast as he could to check up on his unfortunate victim. Damn! It was an Uchiha. Naruto recognized the white and red fan symbol painted to the back of this particular ninja's top. Mister, hey mister. You okay? Naruto began to panic when the guy didn't move. It was an Uchiha all right. The same pale skin, tightly stretched to the bone like porcelain, allowed Naruto to identify the stranger with certainty. Anxiously dropping to his knees, Naruto placed his index and forefinger against the teenager's throat to see if he was still alive. He detected a faint pulse. The guy was alive, but unconscious. Sighing in relief, Naruto sat back on his haunches and regarded the unfortunate victim. The stone had left a big bump on the left side of his head, just missing the shinobi's eye. The projectile had no doubt crushed the Uchiha's left cheekbone and blood was running down the side of the nin's face. If it had hit his eye. Naruto shuddered. He didn't even want to think about what the Uchiha would try to do to him if he damaged one of their precious demon eyes. The clan would hound him wherever he went, and they were bad enough as it was already, putting subtle genjutsu on him to make him walk into things whenever they locked eyes with him. It was a disgusting trick, one they exploited when they noticed his obvious weakness in that particular field. He was beginning to become very careful about avoiding people's eyes when he saw that cursed symbol anywhere. Nevertheless, he had to get this guy to the hospital, to make sure he didn't end up dying. Hoisting the limp body onto his straining shoulder, he began the arduous trek to the one building he hated the most. Konoha Central Hospital. Itachi stared impassively at the scene behind his mask. He had missed his target due to unforeseen consequences. That was not good. His master would be very displeased with this turn of events. Narrowing his eyes at the blonde Uzumaki, questions continued to rage in his head. The boy was strong, unbelievably so. If Itachi had to estimate, he would say the brat was at his level when he had been his age. That would make him just above Shuyunin. But what he had seen earlier was unbelievable. The strength of mind and concentration required in controlling one's movement on the surface of the water going at that speed. It was hard. Something Itachi thought only a genius from the Hyuga or Uchiha clans would be able to pull off. And this boy had done it in 6 days. He had been assigned to watching the Uzumaki this week, and was rapidly changing his opinion of the kid. He was about Sasuke's age and yet, he was far more skilled. But his mark had escaped, and that would delay things indefinitely. There would be no better chance than the one he had just missed, not to mention that his ultimate mission would also be postponed. And that was by far a bigger and more important task. One that was reliant on his failed objective of the day. Yes, his master would not be pleased. At all. Naruto waited anxiously in the lounge of Konoha's biggest and most famous hospital, Konoha Central Hospital. It was located next to the largest and most important building of the village, the Hokage Tower, and it was rumored to have been established by the legendary medic and one of the 3 Sunin, Senjutsu Nade. The hospital had been founded some 20 years prior, which was fairly new in the village, as most of the buildings were the original ones built when Konoha was founded, especially this close to the village center. War and Kuwabai had never reached this far in, and so much of the infrastructure was the same as it had been since Konoha's inception. Naruto peered forlornly out of the window. He wondered absently how it would have been if he had been born when the village was first built. He wondered what the first and second Hokages were really like. All he had to go on were the 2 faces carved into the stone of Hokage Mountain, and that in his 6.5-year-old opinion, meant they looked like bloated frogs. I wonder what the night aim would look like with Akimichi swirls on his cheeks. Grinning internally, he decided to save that thought for later. He may be able to cook up a plan or two that would let him know just what it would look like. Kicking his legs under the plastic seat he was currently situated on, he turned to stare at the door to the examination room that the Uchiha he had knocked out had been taken to. Naruto dearly hoped that nothing serious had happened to him. It was bad enough that he was hated by almost everyone in the village without them resorting to physical violence, and this could be dire if news were to get out that he had hurt an actual shinobi. As he continued to stress over the current issue, the Umbu codenamed Inu opened the door and stepped out. The stoic mask was turned in the blonde's direction, but he didn't know if the elite ninja was actually looking at him or not. It was always kind of creepy for Naruto, seeing all these animal-faced masks directed at him, yet not knowing to what exactly the sight of the person underneath was really directed. Shaking himself from his rapidly derailing thoughts, he cleared his throat. "Umbu-san, is that Uchiha okay?" Naruto waited for the response with wide, anxious eyes. The mask remained silent for a few seconds, which did nothing to reassure the blonde-headed prankster. "Uzumaki Naruto. Was it truly you who knocked Uchiha Shisui, a shinobi of Jounin rank, unconscious?" The voice was almost as bad as the mask, Naruto thought unconsciously. He was in deep trouble now. The guy had been a freakin' Jounin. There was absolutely no point in trying to lie his way out. He was sure the Umbu had some technique that allowed him to detect lies. Yeah. But it ain't what you're thinkin', Umbu-san. See, I was water skiing with my chakra and I needed something to balance myself like the villagers do with their ropes. So I tied a rock to my waist, see, and it worked. Just I went too fast, and when I stopped the rock went flying, and that guy just happened to be there, and it weren't my fault, I swear. Naruto panted after speaking so fast for so long with hardly a pause. The Umbu seemed to scrutinize him even more minutely after his ill-gotten explanation, and that made Naruto's nerves even more brittle. Water skiing. It was more a question than a statement, and Naruto responded quickly. Yeah. See, Jiji gave me the scroll for water walking and I decided to ski using it. I really didn't mean to hit that guy, honest. And please don't tell the Uchiha anything about this, I'll be dead by evening. Naruto was about ready to run as far as he can without stopping, to be away from anything remotely close to the Uchiha, unless the Umbu put him at ease. At least on this occasion, the elite ninja was nice enough to oblige, although Naruto had a strange sense of awareness at that point that the shinobi didn't want to turn him in any way. He wondered at the reason for that. Uchiha Shisui is not dead, neither is he grievously injured. He has already recovered from this ordeal and seems to find much hilarity in the fact that he was bested by a flying stone. I will not be reporting you to the Uchiha, but I must report this to the Hokage. I will be going now. Pausing to regard the blonde for a second, Inu disappeared in a burst of falling leaves. In Naruto's relief-clouded mind, one thought stood out most. I have got to learn that technique. Feeling much safer now that he had gotten out of harm's way, Naruto decided to offer his sincerest apologies to his unwilling victim. Pushing open the door to room 182, he sidled as quietly as he could into said Uchiha's current residence. As he walked in, he spied the Uchiha sitting up in the overly white hospital bed with a slight grin on his face. Naruto thought that that was as good a sign as any, and decided to announce his presence. Hey Uchiha-san. I'm really sorry about what happened. You're alright, right? The teenager turned his head to regard the entree, and upon seeing the worried face of his aggressor, burst into laughter. Ahahaha. He then proceeded to gulp in air for his fit of hysteria and croak out, done in by a stone. And by Uzumaki no less. Ahahahahahaha. To Naruto, the last of his inhibitions fell away. Anyone who laughed like that was a nice guy in his book. Well, you see Uchiha-san, I was using that rock for my water skiing and I kinda lost control of it. Going too fast, I think. Said Uchiha, wiped his eyes from the tears of laughter that had been running down his porcelain skin. He seemed much calmer now that he had laughed so much. No worries, kid. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and I paid the price for it. These things happen. I just can't believe that the first time I get unintentionally knocked out was by a kid with a stone. That's just too much. Naruto smiled at the boisterous reply. I was just scared that your family would come get me if you were hurt. At that quiet admission, the Uchiha's mood turned somber. No one's going to hurt you, kid. I'm not going to tell my family how I got knocked out. Frankly, it was worth it for the laugh. But Naruto knew there was more to his explanation than that. Maybe he had more allies than he thought. Well, I'm glad you're okay. But I gotta go now, Uchiha-san. Again, I'm really sorry for what happened. With a small wave of his hand, the Jounin dismissed the apology and smiled as the blonde Uzumaki escaped his room. His expression turned melancholy as he contemplated his untimely injury. That stone had been flying fast. Too fast to have been thrown, that was for sure. There was no way that he could have predicted such a situation, and even he, the famed Shinkaru no Shisui, could not dodge such a fast-moving and unpredictable projectile. Just how had the kid managed it? There was more to the blonde Jinchuriki than was common knowledge, and Shisui wanted to know more. Maybe Itachi would know, he had been assigned to watching the kid this week. With a start, Shisui remembered why he had been in that location. He needed to move immediately. There was absolutely no telling what was going on within the Uchiha at the moment, and he didn't know if he really wanted to know. He attended the meetings, yes, but many thought him untrustworthy due to his close friendship with the chronically absent Itachi, hence his mission to spy on his friend. The Uchiha wanted assurances of his loyalty. But who would he choose? His clan? Or his brother in all but blood? Naruto literally skipped down the streets of Konoha as he made his way towards his apartment. He had been extraordinarily lucky today, and he didn't want to ruin the day by doing something stupid. He had gotten off scot-free and he was very happy at this moment. So happy was he, that he didn't notice a slightly taller female figure approaching him as he mindlessly skipped down the cobblestone street in front of the hospital, so it was a shock when he smacked into something and fell backwards onto his behind with stars swimming over his eyes. Ow! Hey, what was that for? Upon raising his head, he recognized his assailant at the same time she recognized him. Hey, you're... they said at the same time with fingers pointed at the other. Noticing the absurdity of the situation, both burst out laughing as they regarded one another. The girl was wearing black jogging bottoms, with a white t-shirt. Her hair was done up in twin buns which reminded Naruto of the pandas he used to look at in his storybooks when he was younger. Her skin was very pale, almost as if she hadn't been out of a building in quite a while. Aren't you? Again they both started simultaneously. With a grin, Naruto waved his hand at her to go first. You're that guy that used to get chucked out of the orphanage for coming home late all the time, Naruto, right? Naruto grimaced. That was not a nice memory, although thankfully, he never had to go back there again. Yeah, that's me. Ain't you that girl who volunteered to cook every night? Naruto scratched the back of his neck. That wasn't a particularly distinct personality trait, but at their age he thought it was something weird. Why cook when there were adults there to do it for you? He hardly ever cooked and he was living by himself. What can I say, there were knives in the kitchen. Naruto shivered as a memory hit him. Once he had been hungry and decided to check the orphanage kitchen for some food, he might be able to sneak something out when no one was looking. As he entered the kitchen, something sharp and shiny flew by his head, burying itself into the wall right next to his ear. He remembered the manic smile of the girl in question, and as he stared back at the present incarnation, the image of the past and present overlay each other. Naruto shivered again. This girl was scary. Right, well I'm sorry for be bumpin' into you, but I really gotta be gettin' home now, so I'll be goin' now. And with that, he turned and began to jog in the opposite direction. Hey, wait. Naruto paused. Where did you go? I mean, it's been almost 2 years since anyone saw you. How come you're not at the orphanage anymore? Naruto turned slightly to see the older girl on her feet with her hand outstretched. Honestly, he didn't think any of the kids from the orphanage cared where he was. Once he had come home late at night and they had all stayed up to watch him get in trouble with the patrons. He had never had any friends there, and so he didn't know why this girl was asking him where he went. Why do you care? He knew that came out snidder than he meant it, but he couldn't take it back. The girl visibly recoiled as if she was slapped. She remained quiet for a moment, almost as if she were considering the question. I didn't like what they used to do to you, if that's what you mean. I thought it was stupid that they would kick you out after you got in trouble for being out in the first place. I was always dragged along with the others, but I always thought that you should be able to do everything like everyone else. It was his turn to look shocked. So someone did care about the treatment he had been getting. Well, at least she wasn't one of the bullies then. Hokage gave me an apartment for myself. I've been living there ever since. The girl's eyes widened in shock at the familiarity with which the blonde spoke of the Hokage, the strongest and wisest shinobi in the village. She had been attending the ninja academy for as long as the disappearance of the blonde and so had learned that the correct Hokage, the Sandaime, was known throughout the world as the professor for his knowledge and use of ninjutsu. Distantly, she wondered why she hadn't seen the blonde at the academy. Surely he was attending? How come I haven't seen you at the academy then? Naruto shrugged. Don't wanna be a ninja, so I didn't bother to sign up. The girl looked visibly startled. He didn't want to be a ninja? Practically everyone wanted to be a shinobi after hearing about them all their short lives. Tenten was an orphan like Naruto, and so didn't have parents to tell her what being a shinobi was like. Instead, all she had to go on were the legendary battles that all the kids knew that were told to them as bedtime stories. She really couldn't comprehend anyone not wanting to be a ninja. Look, it's getting cold and dark out here. You wanna come back to my house and we can talk about whatever you want there? Naruto was getting tired of the conversation, and people were starting to stare at the odd pair. He was beginning to see the scowls of anger on some of the villagers' faces as they noticed just who the boy was. Are you sure? I mean, I don't want to cause trouble or anything. The girl was looking more startled from before. Perhaps his offer had been rash, he hoped it wouldn't turn into an interrogation session. Waving his hand, he replied, it's okay, don't worry. It's cold out here, and Gigi will get mad at me if I get sick, unless you need to get back to the orphanage. The girl blanched at that. She was in the academy. She was no longer that restricted anymore. All right, I'll come. And with that she jogged up to Naruto's side and they began the trek to Naruto's home. By the way, I'm Tenten. Naruto grinned. Oh, right. I thought it was Tonton. In a dimly lit room, at the back of a gambling parlor of a distant town, a pink pig farted. What the hell? That stinks. Get outta here, woman. And take your stinkin' pig with ya. Tsunade of the Sunin grumbled as she was forced to vacate another gambling game, this time due to her shameful pet pig. Tonton, why the hell did you have to fart? And what have you been eating? That really stinks. A dark-haired woman next to the famous shinobi snickered. It was never dull with her sensei around. It had been approximately half a year since Naruto had had his ill-fated meeting with one brown-haired, panda-styled aspiring kunoichi. The day that he had invited her back to his house to talk, she had ended up snoring on his couch and Naruto was loath to move someone who was so comfortable, especially someone who had experienced the harshness of the same orphanage he had been forced to endure. Somehow, Tenten had taken a liking to his apartment and began to live there, without any sort of permission from Naruto. He vividly remembered returning late in the evening from training one day, to find that the troublesome girl had barricaded herself in his bedroom after throwing most of his stuff into the hallway. Since then, Naruto had been forced to give her his bedroom whilst his sleeping equipment became the couch and a spare blanket he had dug up from one of the storage cupboards. Retrospectively, Naruto was glad to have any sort of company, although he tried not to show it. It irked him whenever he saw how friends treated each other, playing and joking outside on the streets, and it was something that the blonde Jinchuriki had never really been able to experience. And so, the bun-haired academy student became one of life's constants for Naruto. Apart from her dangerous love of all things pointy, she was generally a bouncy and interesting personality to interact with, which was portrayed in full on one trip to Ichiraku Ramen earlier that year. Tenten had been happily mooching off a bowl of vegetable ramen when a boy from her academy class had walked by. Evident by his pale, pupil-less eyes, the Hyuga in question had taken a swift sneering glance in the girl's direction, before swishing his head and mumbling something that Naruto didn't quite pick up under his breath. Quicker than a cat after a mouse, Tenten had flicked a kunao she had stowed in her black t-shirt, at the arrogant youth, barely missing the top of his head. Try saying that to my face, emo boy. And with that threat, the obviously shaken boy, although he tried very hard to retain his stoic demeanor, scowled and hurried off in whatever direction his destination lay. Naruto had also been forced to watch out for stray kunao. The bun-haired girl loved to throw the things around, and it was fast becoming her favorite pastime to use Naruto as her target. When the Sandaime had found out about Naruto's new apartment companion, he was pleasantly surprised that the boy had finally made a friend around his own age. The Hokage had been quick to notify the orphanage that Tenten would not be returning there as she had found a new home, and could only hope that Naruto's psyche would take a huge boost from this positive development. Naruto, himself, had progressed quickly. After the Uchiha Shisui incident, Sarutobi had inquired as to how he had managed such a feat, and upon learning Naruto's astounding level of mastery of the water walking control exercise, had bestowed the Namikaze legacy with a few new scrolls. Naruto had almost salivated when he had seen the titles. There was one technique for each of the main elemental affinities. The sixth and final scroll was the last of the basic chakra control techniques, and the Sandaime was sure that even if he hadn't given the air pad scroll to the boy, he would have figured it out himself, especially after he had heard that Naruto could do the same thing on water. It was possible to concentrate a large, dense amount of chakra to the feet, and cause the body to hover slightly off the ground. This did not mean that a shinobi could fly, as no one had ever had the chakra capacity to push such a large amount of chakra out of the soles of their feet for a constant amount of time. There were a few instances in history, where a budding jounin had tried just such an idea, and had ended up dead from chakra exhaustion, or from blood loss due to blowing their feet clear off their bodies. Not a nice way to die, that was for sure. In any case, it made tree jumping a whole lot easier, as a ninja would be able to propel themselves forward as they jumped, in short bursts. Air was far harder to control than water was, as it was far more volatile, and so this made for an excellent chakra control exercise, before moving on to elemental control. Naruto had spent 4 months learning 2 of the offensive jutsus and the air pads. He had managed the Gukaku and the Daitapa, but was nowhere near close to mastering them. Of the other jutsu, the Suirai Udan, Shinjuzanshu, and Ibana were all out of the 7-year-old's reach, but he was determined to master them as well. Naruto had, in the last 6 months, observed Tenten going to and from school each day. He was curious to know how much stronger the academy students were than he, and upon asking his flatmate, she had replied that they hadn't really learned anything. Really? I mean, you haven't even learned the hench or the bunshin? Naruto exclaimed in shock. Tenten looked visibly startled. How do you know about those techniques? We've only just started learning them and we've been at the academy for 2 years. Obviously there was something very wrong with the academy. Tenten, do you listen in class? Said girl. Sweat dropped at the question. Of course I do. What's that supposed to mean anyway? Seeing that she had taken his innocent question slightly offensively, he quickly explained himself. Well, I'm not going to the academy, but I learned the kawarimi and hench techniques ages ago. Naruto scratched the back of his head in confusion. That couldn't be right, could it? Wait, what? You can do ninjutsu? Since when? I mean, why the hell would you want to when you don't even wanna be a shinobi? Naruto was taken aback by the question. He knew it would eventually come up, but when Tenten hadn't asked him the night she had come round, he thought she didn't really care. Well, yeah, see, people used to try and attack me sometimes, and don't ask me why, cause I don't know either, so Jiji gave me some scrolls to let me defend myself. After 2 weeks, Tenten had slowly accustomed herself to Naruto's familiarity with the venerable Hokage. She recognized that they had a strong, almost familial bond, and so she no longer thought it odd when he referred to him with such easygoing terms. Eyes wide in anticipation, she immediately asked the first question on her mind. Scrolls. Wait, Naruto, can I see them? Shrugging, Naruto stood and retrieved 3 scrolls from his battered bookshelf. Reseating himself, he rolled the techniques over to his friend. Those are the bunshin, kawarimi, and hench techniques. I've already learned them, so you can go ahead and keep them, although I could never pull off the bunshin. Maybe you'll be able to do it? The girl's eyes shone almost with the same intensity as when she hit a bullseye with her kunai. Scooping them up, she ran to her room and slammed the door. Naruto probably wouldn't get any sleep that night if the shouts of bunshin no jutsu were any indication. The two had fast become close friends after that. Although Naruto thought Tenten was practically his sister, he refrained from calling her Oni-chan for fear of upsetting her. Family was a touchy subject to most orphans, as Naruto could attest to himself. Once Tenten had caught on to the fact that Naruto was a better ninja than anyone at the academy, she had not stopped badgering him to come to the academy to teach some of the idiots there a lesson. Seriously. She had begged, just once. You can beat this emo guy up and then leave. It'll be really funny. Naruto had tried to shoot down every one of her attempts. The kids always bullied him before, what difference would there be now? And there was no way in hell he was going to join the academy. After 5 months of constant pestering, Tenten had finally gotten the blonde-headed boy to agree to attend one day with her, but only after she had explained how many different opportunities there were for pranks at the school. And so Naruto awoke at 6 a.m. on a Monday morning, ready to cause mass mayhem at the one place he swore he would never set foot in. At least, he thought, it won't be a waste of breaking a promise. Oh yes, the whole academy will cry today, heh, even Tenten, although her tears will be from laughing so hard. Pure chaos had erupted that day at the academy. The Chuyunin senseis had arrived that morning to find their classrooms in a state that suggested the academy had been hit by some extremely localized hurricane. Not a single room was left untouched. Chairs and tables lay overturned, rude words chalked on every blackboard, and in one classroom, the tap of a corner sink had been turned on fully and left to flood the room. For one Hyuga Niji, all this was but a trifling matter. It would not do for one as prestigious as him to lose his cool over something as petty as a closed-minded prankster. He sat with an intense expression on his face, staring resolutely at his sensei, Miyamura Hokaro. The Chuyunin was currently attempting to dry up his desk after having spent half the day teaching out in the courtyard due to his submerged classroom. Miyamura looked decidedly agitated that not only had the academy been turned upside down, but also, the culprit had not been found. It was most perplexing that no one had seen anyone out of the ordinary, and with the level of destruction he had witnessed, it was impossible for any of the students to have managed it. Niji humphed mentally at the stupidity of it all. Calls himself a ninja, and yet even the children of the Hyuga branch house acted with more maturity and decorum. He didn't even stop to ponder just how ridiculously hypocritical it was for him to think that. Of course he wouldn't be saying that if he knew what was about to happen to him. Even the stoic Hyuga would be running away screaming at the top of his lungs. Of course, for one, Tenten, this day had been the most eventful and memorable day in her decidedly short life. She had witnessed the total annihilation of all things orderly in a few short hours, and all it took was some ninja wire, a few traps and a well-aimed kunai. Obviously, when Naruto had suggested his plan for the day, she had taken the kunai role for herself. It was a kunai for God's sake. And so here she sat, trying not to laugh like a lunatic in the midst of the war zone whilst she contemplated emo boy's approaching demise. She had thought Naruto was good at shinobi techniques when she had found out how many techniques he knew. She had been very, very wrong. He wasn't just good. He was a genius. But not the sort that many people thought of when associated with that word. Naruto was not book smart. He couldn't understand half of an adult conversation. Neither could he put anything but the most basic statements to use, and seemingly, if the scrolls the Sandaime had given him were any indication, the Hokage had noticed this too. No, Naruto was amazing in his application of said techniques. He could take something so basic, and twist it into something so different that not only would you wonder if he had created an entirely new technique, but also if his head was screwed on correctly. For instance, he had just shown an astounding ability to combine the water walking technique with the henge. By modulating his chakra with the air around him, he had caused the henge to disguise himself as air. He could still be detected from his chakra signature and if someone got close enough to touch him, but the former problem was resolved when he used the chakra beacon technique in order to mask his true location. Oh, everyone knew there was an imposter on the academy grounds today, but nobody knew where it was, although it was definitely in Miyamura-sensei's classroom. Hence, why Miyamura-sensei was so edgy. Anything with a chakra signature that large could very well be a problem for him. It was decidedly Chuyunin level after all. Tenten stared at the back of Hyuga-Niji's head, waiting for the fireworks, and sure enough, as Miyamura-sensei left the room to report that the chakra signature hadn't moved but all was well, a small stream of fire seemingly appeared out of thin air and lit the elitist Hyuga's oh so precious hair on fire. Tenten cackled so loud that everyone, including an oblivious Niji, turned to stare at her as if she had sprouted a Ninken's head out of the one she already had. Tears streaming down her face, she managed to raise a trembling finger at the Hyuga prodigy. Emo face, ahaha, heh, your, ahaha, why your hair's on fire. After that exclamation, she tumbled off the side of her chair, rolling with manic hilarity, before gasping for breath and pounding on the flooring in mirth. The Hyuga snorted. As if anyone could light his beautiful hair on fire. The hair he spent 30 minutes grooming into the fitting Hyuga style of perfection. That was, until another classmate turned from watching the currently indisposed Konoha lover and gasped. Hyuga-san, your hair really is on fire. Niji felt in then, the searing heat that began to permeate his scalp. It took a moment to register in his rigorously trained mind that he was on fire, as in, actually burning. As in, him, Hyuga Niji, prodigy of the Hyuga branch house, was flaming in the middle of a wooden classroom. Screaming like a little girl, the branch house prodigy bolted up and ran to the overflowing sink whose tap had been hastily plugged due to someone gluing it in the maximum on state. Dunking his head in the most unsightly manner into the overflowing basin, he put the fire out before sighing and groggily extracting his sopping cranium from the sink. Tenten had by now, slightly recovered from her bout of hysteria, and upon seeing the state of the half-burnt and soggy Hyuga's hair, which had smoke curling from the burnt and ragged split ends, once again burst into uncontrolled laughter. This time as she fell off her chair, the poor furniture snapped due to the sudden shift in weight, and she tumbled to the floor laughing all the while. Hyuga Niji was not amused. His hair was wet and ruined, and there was no one to Jayuken into next Monday. He settled for going home with dignity. That is, screaming and crying. As Naruto left the academy grounds that day with a broad grin on his face, he wondered absently if this is what every day would have been like if he had decided to attend the academy. He knew subconsciously that it wouldn't have been anything like what had happened today. For one, he wouldn't have learned the stuff he did in order to pull off 99% of what he had done, and so he resigned himself to simply supporting Tenten on her way to becoming a genin instead. As he turned off the road that the academy was situated on, he bumped into someone roughly around his own age. "Hey, watch where you're going." Naruto stepped back in surprise. The guy looked sort of like Shisui-san. "You're an Uchiha." It was more a statement than a question. The boy looked taken aback for a second before he regained his composure. "Yeah, I am." "So what? That means I'm better than everyone else." Naruto instantly glared at the boy after his admission. And to think that he thought the guy might be like Shisui. "Well, sorry Mr. Uchiha. I'm sorry I dirted your spotless clothes." This was definitely not the ending that Naruto wanted to his fine day. Noticing the jab the blonde Jinchuriki had made at his disheveled state, the young Uchiha scowled. It wasn't his fault he had gotten dirty from his training. What would a civilian know about being a ninja anyway? As a ninja, he was an elite of society, and as an Uchiha he was practically royalty to them. Naruto saw the anger and arrogance flit across the face of the boy in front of him and knew that it would be quickly followed by violence. And so he decided to end the standoff in a decidedly Naruto-ish fashion. By burping in the Uchiha's face. The Uchiha's nose immediately scrunched up as it was saturated by the deluge of foul-smelling gas that spewed from the blonde's mouth. As his mind attempted to comprehend just what was assailing his senses, all notion of his surrounding temporarily vacated his mind. Naruto, on seeing his opponent's preoccupation with his chemical warfare, took this as his cue to leave. Pushing a moderate amount of chakra to his feet, he launched himself into the air, spraying the prideful youth with a smattering of mud, dirt, and stones. To add insult to injury, as he landed on the nearest rooftop he shouted, "Smell ya later." And with that he took off running at top speed towards his apartment. It was a further 5 minutes before the Uchiha realized just what his aggressor had said, and in his rage, he swung his head in every direction, attempting to locate the source of his ire. If he ever saw that blonde-headed idiot again, he was going to murder him. "Sasuke, what are you doing and, oh, what's that smell?" Sasuke's head whipped around and his body jolted as if struck. His academy sensei, Umino Irika, had been approaching the corner of the street and now stood with a look of slight surprise and disgust on his face. His eyes wide, like a rabbit caught in headlights, he bolted for the Uchiha district and a change of clothes. It would only be another few hours before the young Uchiha realized that his blonde-haired enemy had used chakra in his jump, and it would cause him to have a sleepless night angrily pondering how a civilian could do something he could not. Just who was that blonde anyway? It all started when Tenten decided to illuminate Naruto with regards to birthday parties. 3 weeks had passed in a blur of laughter and fun for the two preteens, since the academy fiasco. They had become nigh inseparable as a bond of mischief and camaraderie had formed between them. So when Naruto had mentioned in passing that he had never experienced a birthday party, Tenten decided to educate him, by using her own birthday as an excuse. It had started out like normal. They had awoken that morning to a beautiful summer's day, birds chirping and a slight breeze wafting in through the windows of Naruto's apartment. Tenten had been a ball of excitement and energy from the moment her eyes had opened. She would never reveal to her blonde-haired companion that this was her first birthday party too. She wanted both of them to enjoy it as much as possible and so didn't want to ruin the airy atmosphere that had been built up in the days leading up to the occasion. Naruto had woken up slightly earlier than the bun-haired girl and proceeded to pour out 2 bowls of cereal and 2 glasses of orange juice, ready for both as soon as Tenten made her way down. Tenten was surprised by this action, but was happy that he had thought to do this for her. It made her feel special, and for one such as them, it was an extraordinary feeling. After breakfast and clearing the small kitchen table situated in the middle of the living room, Naruto brought out a hastily wrapped package, decorated with orange and green wrapping paper. Tenten squealed when she saw it and ripped the present apart to reveal a pair of ceremonial daggers decorated with a twisting emerald dragon that made its way from where the handle met the blade, to the very tip of the dagger. It was beautiful, yet simple, and the young girl's breath caught in her throat as she studied the sparkling design. "You like pointy things, right? I thought you would like them 'cause it's pointy, see?" Naruto scratched the back of his neck as he confessed his intention. After a heartfelt thank you, they huddled together to plan what they would be going for the rest of the day. "Well, I'm definitely skipping school today. Let's do something fun." Tenten was literally skipping at this point. Naruto was an incredibly unique person, and so whatever he came up with was bound to be exhilarating and dangerous. "I've already set something up, so let's go. Oh, and we need to make a stop at the Higurashis before we get there, okay?" Tenten nodded enthusiastically. There was no doubt in her mind that the daggers had come from the Higurashi weapons store, and she was always excited about what new weapons came in every day. For Naruto, however, he needed something for his newest idea that he couldn't possibly find anywhere else. There wasn't likely to be a place that would have what he was looking, let alone one that wouldn't throw him out. So with that, the two youngsters readied themselves to move out. If only Tenten knew what Naruto had in store for the day. Entering the Higurashi weapons store, the two began to look around the aisles, Naruto for the last component of his plan and Tenten out of interest. The owner of the store regarded them for a moment before hailing them. "Yo, Naruto. And is that the Tenten you keep telling me about?" Higurashi Naruto was a large muscular man. He was heavy-set, with a square jaw and bulging biceps accentuated by his sleeveless white tank top. You could see the jet black tattoos that had been grafted onto his skin, and the image gave him a very resilient look. Hiya Higurashi-san. Yeah, this is Tenten. She loves all your swords and stuff. At Naruto's enthusiastic reply, the middle-aged weaponsmith regarded the petite blonde-haired girl with a critical eye. There were so few ninja these days who really valued weaponry, but according to Naruto, this girl had a thirst and excitement that one could only expect from a true weapons user. The feeling was usually regarded as something a samurai shared with his sword. It was definitely a rare thing to see in this modern day. Well, what did you come here for, Gaki? You bought those daggers yesterday, didn't you? Why didn't you just get what you needed yesterday instead of wasting another trip? At that proclamation, Tenten stared wide-eyed at the shopkeeper before directing her unnerving gaze to her companion. So the daggers had been for the girl. The smith grinned to himself. Young Naruto had found a friend, or so it seemed. Again, he regarded the surprised girl. If her enthusiasm was anything to go by, coupled with this new piece of information he had gleaned from her reaction, she probably felt the same way as he did with regards to weaponry. However, Naruto wanted to be sure before doing something he would later regret, and so he decided to question her intentions a bit. Tenten, was it? How did you like those daggers? Said aspiring Konoichi's head whipped round to stare at the shopkeeper once again. It was almost comical that her expression had not changed in the least since she had found out where Naruto had bought her birthday present from. Shaking herself from her reverie, she replied excitedly. They were really pretty. The light shines off the dragon, making it sparkle in a really mysterious way. Look. To drive home her point, she pulled one of the daggers from her right pants pocket with a flourish, and waved it back and forth slowly under the large man's nose. Wow, slow down there, miss. If you wave them around you might hurt somebody. I can see what you mean. The reflection of the light causes the green pattern to distort and it looks like the dragon is writhing on the blade. Tenten nodded boisterously. She didn't notice Naruto studying her again as she was too preoccupied with the blade in her hands. Naruto caught the shine in her chocolate-colored eyes as the light reflected off the blade and onto her iris. It gave the young girl's eyes an ethereal glow as the emerald mixed with the brown of her orb, glowing with the luminosity of the sun's light streaming through the windows. She had a thirst for weaponry, that much the elder weapon maker was sure about, and his resolve was further strengthened when he caught the expression of awe and admiration that the girl held as she ran her finger down the dragon pattern and across the edge of the blade. So great was her concentration, that she didn't even notice that the dagger had cut into her finger as she had done so, and Naruto knew that the apprentice he needed was right in front of him. For many years since his shinobi career had ended, he wondered how he would pass on his skills in weapon making to the next generation. He knew that his expertise was too valuable for Konoha to lose, and yet he had no family nor was he married. He had kept an eye out for a suitable apprentice, and when young Naruto had first burst into his small store, he had thought a new prospective student had appeared. Of course, after spending some time with the boy, his hopes had been dashed when he found that the Jinchuriki had no interest in weapons, other than throwing them at things. Naruto was loath to treat the boy like the other villagers though. He, the Sandame and Hatake Sakumo had been there when they had selected Namikaze Minato as the yandame, and the three friends knew that when the golden-haired Hokage did something, he did it to perfection. His evidence for this was during the last great shinobi war when all thought Konoha had lost. Morale was low amongst the troops and Iwa's force dominated the battlefield due to their overwhelming presence. Yet, Minato had promised that he was working on a technique to end the war. Everyone was pestering him to use it, but he had vehemently shot all of them down, stating that he would not use it until he was sure it would work. And then on that fateful day, Sakumo had resigned himself to death and had declared that the Konoha forces under his command would make a final push in an attempt to break Iwa's front line. As the brave warriors in the contingent had slammed like a battering ram into the IWA platoon, hope blossomed in the minds of their men, the tide of battle seemed to change in that instant as the ferocity of the counter-offensive speared through vanguard of Iwa's front line. But that too had changed, and the Rock's techniques on practically their home terrain shifted the battle favor once again in their direction. Naruto remembered the utter despair that had gripped his heart in its iron clutches, as he realized that the fight was lost. Konoha was lost. But then it had happened. A single scroll had been thrown high into the air from the Konoha camp, and Naruto distantly recognized it as a sealing scroll. It soared across the battlefield, and every shinobi, enemy, and ally alike, had gazed up at the object, the fighting temporarily forgotten. In a dramatic fashion, the scroll had unrolled itself as it was buffeted by the wind, blocking out the sun temporarily, and in a puff of smoke, Naruto spied a hail of weaponry falling to the ground around all of the combatants. Minato didn't even wait for his tri-pronged kunai to hit the ground. As soon as they were at head height, he initiated two of his techniques that in conjunction, made his legacy feared throughout the entire shinobi world and hailed him as the most devastating ninja in the history of man. Naruto could hardly comprehend that within a 30-second lull, the entire IWA force lay decimated, bodies strewn about the battlefield. What shocked him to his core was that there was hardly any blood, yet the IWA shinobi were most definitely dead. And then he had turned to see a sight that would be etched into his memory until the day he would die. Among the fallen bodies of Konoha's enemy, a golden flash signified the arrival of a single shinobi. His Hittite ends and his cloak tail flapping in the wind, accentuating the flame pattern sewn into the bottom of his coat. Sunlight glinted off his golden blonde hair as it swayed to the breeze. Both his arms were pointed downward at his sides, with his right arm slightly further away from his body than his left. Naruto regarded the young man in shock as the last ocean blue spirals of his legendary Rasengan faded away and he turned his head slightly to the side. And in that brief moment, the weapons specialist witnessed the sapphire sparkle of the ninja's eye as he stared at the devastation around him. After seeing Naruto, the son of the greatest ninja period, he had thought that maybe that same glint would carry over to his son, but as he looked at the weapons in Naruto's store, the ex-shinobi instinctively knew that it wouldn't be in weaponry. And so, with a heavy heart, he had given up ever passing on his skills, even at the Sandame's insistence that the village could not afford to lose such a thing. But now, he had found exactly what he had been looking for all these years, and he didn't intend to let it escape. 10-10, how would you like to learn all about these weapons? The question came out hesitantly, but Naruto knew deep down, that it was because he was afraid of rejection. He was afraid that the only link that had appeared would disappear as fast as it came. His fears, however, were unfounded, and if it was possible, Tenten's eyes would have widened even further than they already were. She let out a small gasp, that sounded like a what, but Naruto couldn't be sure. After a small gap in which the young girl had gone incredibly still, the shop suddenly burst into motion. Naruto, who had been searching the displays for what he was looking for, was startled at the gasp and his head snapped around so fast that the ex-shinobi almost winced and the whip-like crack that was given off. Tenten began jumping up and down screaming yes, over and over again. The weapons maker's mouth twitched upwards in a small smile as he committed the scene to memory. His first apprentice was definitely one to remember. Attempting to hide his relief, Naruto briskly straightened and spoke calmly and clearly. Excellent. If you wish to learn about all things pointy, be here after the academy every day and we will continue from there. Now Uzumaki, what are you looking for? Naruto stared at the muscular man like he had said something weird. Since when did Higurashi-san call him Uzumaki? Shrugging it off as another weird quirk of the crazy knife man, Naruto told him what he had come for. I'm looking for a 1-meter length of A-grade rubber, in the form of a rope. It was Naruto's turn to look at the other with a strange expression. A-grade rubber? The boy must know that A-grade rubber stretches up to 10 times its original length, so why would he want it? I don't currently have that high-grade rubber, but I have got a half. Maybe you would like a slightly longer piece of a half instead. It should do the same job though, whatever it is you want to do with it. Naruto continued to stare at the blonde-haired boy with an unreadable expression. Naruto took a minute to consider the proposal. Could it work? With a grade, the strength of the rubber was definitely enough to withstand the kind of force he was looking to put on it. A half would be slightly less resilient, and a longer piece meant less resilience. Ah well, won't know till I try. And with that thought, Konoha's pariah purchased his last component of the day, and both kids left the shop with a smile on their faces. One smiled due to a prospective future, but the other smiled for an entirely different reason. And when Naruto smiles, something cries. Tenten gaped at the impossibility of what Naruto's birthday event actually was. He wanted to slingshot into the sky and then get Tenten to catch him. The process would then be repeated by herself and Naruto would catch her. Well, unless you're scared and you don't want to do it. Then we can cancel and go do something else. Whatever you want. Tenten was in a quandary. It looked like it had taken a while to set up the huge contraption, and if she said no, it would be a total waste of effort on his part. No, she would do this, and God, it looked like it would be crazy fun. Naruto had tied a huge trampoline horizontally to two trees at the edge of a clearing with ninja wire. The whole thing looked quite secure, but if Tenten hadn't found that absurd, then what he did next was downright nuts. The rubber he had recently purchased had been tied to the center of the trampoline and the other end hooked to Naruto's waist. See, what we gotta do is stretch the rubber as far away from the trampoline as possible and then let go. We will be pulled back into the trampoline and it will bounce us back out again. When the rubber gets stretched fully again, we unhook it and pitch these two rubber hooks at those trees. He raised his finger and pointed at two trees that stood parallel at the other end of the clearing. Tenten gaped even harder. That was almost 300 meters from their current position. If that was to happen, the rubber would curl around the trees and fling them into the air. Exactly. Naruto had been watching her face to see if she had figured it out. And that's why I need you to catch me. Now, cause this is a half and not a grade rubber, I don't know if it will hold up, so I'm gonna try it first, and if it's safe then you can have a go too. Tenten tapped the side of her head thoughtfully. If she was truthful with herself, the idea was downright lunacy, yet there was a small thrill of excitement that went up her spine as she thought about how it would feel to experience the ride. She had wanted a memorable first birthday after all. All right, let's do this, Naruto. Naruto stared bug-eyed at the new nickname, but ignored it as he began to stretch himself out. When the rubber was taut and he could go no further, he crouched down to stabilize himself lest he get pulled back when he wasn't ready. The tensile force was so strong that his body was shaking with the exertion of trying to stay where he was. Giving a thumbs up to the birthday girl, he released his hold on the ground and the rubber sprang back, pulling the 7-year-old along with it. As Naruto's back hit the trampoline, time slowed down for him as the plasticky surface mushroomed inwards from the impact. With a sharp twang he was thrown back out, and he released the hook from his waist as he shot off down the clearing towards his target. Tenten watched with bated breath as her friend zoomed past her position, a look of pure joy etched on his features. Just as he reached the opposite tree line, he threw the two rubber hooks at the parallel trees. They twirled 3 times around the branches before hooking securely to the bark. Naruto's speed immediately slowed as his direction changed drastically within a second. He had a brief feeling of vertigo as he ballooned up towards the canopy, releasing the ends to the hooks that were in his hands. With a whoop, he was fired into the air like a stone being released from a slingshot, directly up into the sky at impossible speeds. The feeling must have been incredible, as Tenten could hear her friend screaming in joy to the heavens as he flew. Snapping out of her thoughts, she got ready to act. Throwing 2 kunai, she ripped the trampoline from the tree and quickly dragged it towards the center of the clearing, where she thought the blonde was going to land. Squinting at the midday sun, she could barely make out a falling blob of black. Quickly positioning the trampoline directly under the falling maniac, she hurriedly moved back to stay clear of the human projectile. Once again, the blonde hit the trampoline, and for a second Tenten thought he would punch right through the fabric at the speed he was falling. The trampoline sprung him back out again, and this was repeated until he came to a stop. Tenten was in peals of laughter at the way Naruto was bouncing on the trampoline, sometimes on his head with a stupidly delirious smile on his face. It was like he had taken one of the Nidame's notorious happy pills. Naruto wobbled to the side of the trampoline and toppled over the edge and onto the grass of the clearing. That was beyond crazy. Tears were streaming from his eyes due to the speed of his fall, his blood pounding through his body in an adrenaline-induced rush, and his mouth felt like it would never be able to close again. Ha, oh god. That was priceless. My turn, my turn. Naruto slowly raised his head from eating dirt. As his eyes made it up to her face, he grinned like a loon. You're gonna love this. And with that he sprang up to set it up again. They went at it for another few tries, and each time, none of them realized that the half rubber was slowly weakening. Just as Naruto decided to have his last ride, the rubber hooks reached their limit. Naruto's first inkling that something was wrong was the slightly tearing sound he heard as the hooks pulled him up towards the sky. There was no time for him to even think, as with a loud snap, the hooks disconnected prematurely, and he was flung into the sky at an angle and not straight up like what was meant to happen. Tenten's shout of his name was lost to the wind as he blew through the sky towards the hot springs of the village. Hopefully he would land in one of the larger rivers in that direction, as that should relieve some of the monstrous force of his fall and he wouldn't be injured too badly. That was, of course, if he didn't die. As he began his descent, he screwed his eyes shut and maneuvered his body to land forward so he could roll immediately. His descent would take him into a bush right by the side of one of the hot springs, and Naruto braced for impact. The Gama-senin, Jiraiya, was having a good day. He had been in Konoha, spying on the hot springs without anyone knowing. He could be out of here without anyone knowing too, and then Sarutobi-sensei wouldn't be able to pull him into anything Konoha-related, so he could continue his naughty ways. He absently reached up with his right sleeve to wipe the blood trailing from his nose as he gazed lecherously through his telescope at the women's side of the hot spring. No one would catch him when they couldn't see him. He was using the control/henge hybrid he had created back in his youth to hide his person, and so no one could see him. Oh, they could sense his chakra, but in this village there were too many people for them to realize it was him, especially since he had reduced his chakra levels to that of a civilian. He giggled. It was useful having the skills that he had, that was for sure. Nothing could have prepared him for what happened at that instant. Jiraiya froze when he heard a slight whistling in the air, his right arm still raised in front of his nose. Quickly checking through his telescope as the whistling got louder, there had been no change in the women's side, although some were staring and pointing at the sky, seemingly following something as it fell towards the ground. Turning to look at the sky, something hit Jiraiya with the force of a freight train. He was slammed heavily into the ground and the pavement cratered under him, as stones were thrown into the air. Jiraiya's body was literally bounced off the stone floor and thrown into the wall of the hot spring, his invisibility jutsu disengaging at the shock and pain of his predicament. He literally blew through the side of the wall and landed with an unceremonious splash in the middle of a group of women. A hush descended on the entire hot spring as the women glanced down at what had broken down the wall. "Isn't that, Jiraiya-sama?" Catching on to the question voiced, the women began to boil in anger, putting the falling object and the arrival of the super pervert together. Jiraiya groggily raised his head from the steaming water. If he wasn't in mortal peril, he would have been enjoying the sight that met his eyes. Alas, he had to move straight away. Jumping up, he ran as fast as he could out of the hole, stopping to grab the thing that had hit him, realizing that it was an unconscious boy. The kid would pay for what he did, whatever the reason was. And with that he hightailed in down the street, with the screams of the females in the hot spring ringing in his ears. Tenten fell over laughing for the umpteenth time that day. Naruto's story was ludicrous, only made more comical by the bandages tied around his torso and head, attempting to hide the humongous bump on his right cheekbone. He was such a character. Not only had he hit someone, but he had hit one of the Densetsu no Sunin. The world was definitely a much brighter place with Naruto around. As Tenten took a moment to wipe the tears of mirth streaming from her eyes, she glanced at the legendary shinobi, who sat quietly staring at the blonde-haired patient with a stony expression. What's his problem? Tenten frowned at the way Jiraiya was looking at her friend. It was almost as if he knew Naruto. Your name is Uzumaki Naruto. The question came out gruff like a pencil scratching on paper. The somber expression made it seem like the powerful man was afraid of the answer he would get. Yeah, I am. How did you know? The Sennin did not reply to Naruto's question, instead he slumped forward on the stool next to Naruto's hospital bed, placing his head in his hands. For Naruto and Tenten, they didn't know what to make of the ninja's reaction. Naruto thought that maybe this was another person that hated him for who he was, and yet he didn't even know the reason why people hated him. For Jiraiya it was an entirely different story. He was faced with a reminder of his past, of his failings, and of his broken promises. The legacy of his student who had been mistreated and shunned by all those around him sat injured on a bed in front of him. Jiraiya couldn't bring himself to admit his failings from years ago, but raising his head he stared dully at the boy that was his godson. I'm so sorry. Naruto almost missed the whisper that escaped the old man's lips, and from her perplexed expression, Tenten hadn't heard it at all. For what, mister? Have we met somewhere or something? The man in red simply continued to stare at the boy. Naruto shrugged at the strange behavior displayed by his unlucky victim. He seemed to be hitting people a lot these days. First Shisui and now this guy. Tenten didn't have a clue what was going on between the two, but she didn't want to lose this chance to speak to such a legendary ninja. Her idol was Senjutsu Nate after all, and that would make this guy her teammate. You're Jiraiya-sama, right? I've heard all about you. Tenten was obviously excited, and her proclamation did much to lighten the suffocating mood that had permeated the air. Jiraiya didn't even glance at her, his attention fully on Naruto, and Tenten felt a twinge of jealousy run through her. What was so special about Naruto? Why wouldn't her idol's teammate talk to her? Silence once again settled upon the three, and for a while it remained that way. Kid, how's the academy going? Naruto looked up from the floor to regard the man once again. Cocking his head to the side, he responded bluntly. I ain't in the academy. Didn't wanna go. A look of shock flitted across the Sennin's face before he schooled his expression once again. How did you use your chakra in mid-air to slow yourself down if you didn't learn that at the academy? Naruto looked startled at the question. How had the guy known he had done that when he hadn't been looking in his direction or paying attention to anything other than his telescope? How do you know I can even do that? It isn't taught at the academy. Naruto's look was like steel now, and Jiraiya was distinctly reminded of his deceased student as he was stared down by such eyes. True, they didn't teach air pads to anyone below Chuyunin, and that had definitely been a practical use of the skill. Sighing, the middle-aged shinobi responded like a teacher speaking to his student after a particularly foolish question was asked. Kid, I felt your chakra flare as you used the air pads. I'm not one of the Sunin for nothing, you know. Naruto looked scared for a moment. If this guy hated him, then it would get out that he knew such things. The villagers would definitely respond negatively to such a revelation, and he didn't want him and Tenten to spend their lives expecting a threat at every turn. He then remembered the large man's words from a few moments before. I'm so sorry. Sandame Jiji taught me a lot of stuff when I was younger. That's how I knew the air pads. This time the shock remained on the legendary shinobi's face for a few seconds, before he hastily responded. Sarutobi taught you some techniques. Jiraiya was evidently surprised at this development. Well, he didn't really teach me, just gave me a bunch of scrolls to learn how to protect myself. Jiraiya sat back on his stool. No way. Just no way. The kid learned the air pads from a scroll. The last stage of control exercises before elemental manipulation, and he had learned it without going to the academy, and from a scroll. Jiraiya's mind reeled in shock as he thought about the implications of such a thing. That would make him better than his father by almost half a year, but Minato had grown up in wartime. How was it possible for someone to learn it faster without a teacher and in a time of peace no less? The kid had to be a genius. There was no the explanation. Jiraiya knew that he had to act now. He couldn't leave the boy now that he was confronted with what he had attempted to leave behind. He should never have come back to Konoha. He could have hidden from his obligations till the end of his days, but once again his stupidity led him to trouble. What would Tsunade and Orochimaru say if they could see him now? He snorted at that thought. They couldn't say anything. They were worse than he was, Tsunade with her drinking and gambling problems and Orochimaru with his twisted beliefs. He wouldn't run away from his problems anymore, unlike his wayward teammates. He would help his godson just like Sarutobi-sensei was helping him. He really didn't understand how very wrong he was about the boy in front of him. The door to the hospital room opened and a flustered nurse entered. Ahem. Jiraiya-sama, there's a group of people outside demanding that you, come down to die would be the correct wording. The woman looked slightly angry herself as Jiraiya realized that the retribution for his hot spring stunt was about to bite him in the back. Glancing around, he looked for the closest avenue to escape, but with a start, he looked sideways to find the nurse's hand clamped on his shoulder preventing him from moving. I must say I agree with them on this. Jiraiya blanched. Turning his head, he capitalized on the fact that Naruto was in the room, using the tried and tested Namikaze bait. Naruto, you want some ramen? My treat. And with that, the blonde bolted upright, grabbed Tenten's arm and sprinted out the door towards Ichiraku's. In the moment of chaos, the nurse had relaxed her hold and Jiraiya used the opportunity to jump out the window. As Naruto and Tenten ran towards the ramen stand, they glanced at each other briefly. Why would a whole load of women want to hurt Jiraiya? Slowly, Tenten began to catch on. You said you landed next to the hot springs, right? The women's side, right? Naruto bobbed his head in the affirmative, still confused. Tenten cracked her knuckles. There was a pervert to kill. Jiraiya was stunned. 2 weeks. It had taken the blonde 2 weeks to learn the air pads. That was incredible. And yet he was such a bumbling idiot. He had mastered an exercise that took an experienced Chunin a week to complete and he had done it in only double the average time. The Gama-senin shook his head. It just seemed so impossible. That was how it was, Jiraiya. I was surprised myself, but please keep in mind that he is not a shinobi of this village. He has only the rights of a civilian. If you attempt to apprentice him, the council will no doubt shoot that proposal down as soon as it leaves my mouth. Sarutobi Hiruzen blew a steady stream of smoke from the side of his mouth. Now on to more pressing matters. The Uchiha are planning a coup d'état. Jiraiya's eyes widened. What? What do you mean, sensei? That sounds crazy. Why would they want to do that when they have everything they asked for? Sarutobi sighed. He knew this was going to happen. He had been monitoring them since he had first been appointed as Hokage all those years ago. If there was one thing that his two sensei had taught him, it was to be wary with the clan. Making a long chain of hand seals, he slammed his hands onto a seal that was painted directly in front of him on his desk. The seal lit up in beautiful cobalt before the glow trailed along the seal network and blossomed out to encompass the whole room. Jiraiya, ever since Uchiha Madara's fight with my sensei at the Valley of the End, I have been very attentive with any and all news that reached my ears from the Uchiha's affairs. It was simply impossible for them to turn their backs on the strongest shinobi to ever grace their ranks, let alone lead them, without suffering some form of retribution. I found it odd that a ninja as rebellious as he would simply leave them alone after they ignored and deviated behind his back. There must have been a reason, a component the Shoday and Nidame missed that was important, so important that it meant the very stability of the village. And so, I had them watched. I had them infiltrated down to the very depths of their secrets, and this is the result of that intelligence. Sighing again, the old Hokage stood and made his way to the window to stare forlornly out at the Konoha night lights. The village was as beautiful at night as it was when the sun was shining. The trees stood as sentinels, lining every pathway, and looming in the distance, beyond Konoha's huge wall. The rainbow of lights were spread out all over the village, and from his vantage point, the Sandaime hoped that it would stay this way. However, as he thought this, the picture of a certain blonde-haired Jinchuriki flashed across his mind's eye. It was foolish, he knew, and yet Naruto had still grown up with a semblance of sanity. There was hope left in the Hokage's legacies, and they would be the ones to keep this village upright, although to what extent Naruto would fit into this, Sarutobi didn't know. Tonight. They will move tonight. I have no idea how they plan to move, directly or indirectly, but they will be moving tonight. I have my agent ready to eliminate them as soon as he witnesses the movement begin. Jiraiya blanched. A single shinobi up against the entire Uchiha clan? Are you insane? Sarutobi had obviously been expecting that reaction as he simply stared at his former student. Do you not think that I have all the factors taken into account? I sent that specific agent because of this. Sarutobi continued to peer at Jiraiya in an expectant way. For the life of him, the legendary shinobi could not figure out what was wanted from him. Uchiha Itachi. Jiraiya's eyes widened once again. That explained it? The prodigy. The genius. The monotonous killer. He assured me that he was fully capable of taking them out. I have full faith in him. Sarutobi retook his seat and began to rub the bridge of his wizened nose. For a moment, Jiraiya looked slightly skeptical that the boy could pull it off. He was only 13 after all, yet his sensei seemed so sure. Whatever, it wasn't his problem. Why are you telling me this? Sarutobi's eyes hardened. Jiraiya shivered mentally. He knew it wasn't directed at him, but his sensei's anger was a very serious thing indeed. The legend of the professor was known all over the world after all. Naruto cannot be anywhere near the Uchiha district tonight. This is your job. Keep him from there at all costs. I will brook no argument on this. You will make sure he is not even 500 meters away from that area of Konoha until the night's events are over. To Jiraiya, this was an incredibly odd order. What did Naruto have to do with the Uchiha? What would be gained by keeping him away from the inevitable fight? It just didn't make any sense that Sarutobi would tell him to do this. Sarutobi seemed to have caught his ex-student's confusion and wearily explained his reasoning. I confess that something happened that I could not have foreseen. It should never have happened, and yet it did, and now I am faced with the consequences of my own foolishness. At Jiraiya's perplexed expression, the Hokage continued. I and a few of the Umbu recognized Naruto's growth early on in his training. He was able to adapt a technique or a basic shinobi skill, without any real knowledge of how they worked. Recently I got word that he had even used the henge/control hybrid that you created yourself, to hide himself and turn the academy upside down. Before this, however, there was a mission where his expertise would have been handy to the Umbu that were assigned to carry it out. Sarutobi's hand clenched painfully on the surface of the table, his voice low and filled with grief. It went horribly wrong. The Chuyunin under suspicion escaped before we could eliminate him, and just as the Umbu managed to subdue him, the enemy had made contact with Naruto. That event has scarred him, devastated his psyche, not unlike Tsunade's fear of blood. He had no intention of becoming a shinobi, and yet I forced his hand. We are yet to see the consequences from that tragedy. Jiraiya could only stare at his sensei. He was making it sound as if the brat had some serious mental problems, but he didn't. Jiraiya could attest to the fact that he was happy and content with his life. Just what was he missing? He was hospitalized for a week, such was the mental damage. You wouldn't know Jiraiya, as you hadn't seen him grow up, but Naruto heals at an accelerated rate that can only be a trait of the Kyuubi. Jiraiya winced at the hidden barb within his sensei's words. So he's mentally unstable? Is the seal okay? Sarutobi nodded. The seal is fine. It has completely shut the Kyuubi's essence off from Naruto. Minato did an excellent job. I also think the beast is sleeping after the amount of chakra it expelled that night. We will have to see what happens to young Naruto if the Kyuubi ever awakens. But that is beside the point. Naruto must not come into contact with the Uchiha this night. The damage to his mind is severe, yet he covers it up with a smile. I do not wish to see his mind any further damaged. Jiraiya nodded at that. He had better get to it right away. Standing, he moved towards the door as a bright blue flash signified the dropping of the sound cancellation seal. Where would he find Naruto? He froze. Sarutobi looked up when he felt Jiraiya stop moving. His chakra had begun to move agitatedly as if there was something bothering him. What is the problem, Jiraiya-kun? At Jiraiya's reply, Sarutobi vaulted over the side of his desk, dropping his cloak and hat, revealing him in full combat clothing. Naruto was playing a prank that night on the Uchiha. As Naruto jumped from a rooftop outside of the Uchiha district to one inside, he almost laughed at how easily he had managed to get in. There were no guards, no alarms, and most of all no villagers. It was like there was an emergency and everyone had been evacuated. Naruto grinned wider as he jumped to another rooftop on the opposite side of the Japanese-styled street. Halfway through his jump, a smell wafted up to his nose that he recognized on a primal level. His entire body froze mid-jump and he missed the side of the building and tumbled to the ground below. Naruto was trapped. Everywhere he looked there were dead bodies. Blood everywhere, even on his clothes. As he fell to his knees, splashing into a puddle of blood, he raised his hands to his face. Blood was on his hands. No, 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 no. This can't be. The entire street was deathly silent. The wind whistled in the trees like a symphony of death, and in the center of this massacre, was he, a poor, scared little boy. Naruto had no choice to accept it now. The world was too big for him. He could not hope to escape the dangers of the shinobi world. Unbidden, a memory hit him from a year or so prior. A blade sliding so easily through the torso and heart of a man. His blood splattering all over Naruto's body. His hands stained in the blood of the shinobi. And his last, loathing, hating, terrible word in the world of the living, a testament to his evil deeds and his trip to a hellish finality. Demon. His hands shook. His very soul shook to the core, but most of all his heart cried tears of blood. He wanted to play a prank, a harmless prank, and instead he was reminded of his past. Events he dearly wanted to forget. The day his most trusted Jiji used him for the sake of the village. The day the shinobi dyed his very soul with the slick, crimson lifeblood that he so hated. And now all around him, he was drowning in it. Feverishly, he stood, the blood dripping from his kneecaps, running down his legs and soaking into his socks and the soles of his feet. He felt dirty, tainted, submerged in the death and decay strewn all around the streets of the Uchiha district. The moon itself was a blood-red color, standing stark and clear against the complete blackness of the clear night sky behind it. And as he stumbled backwards attempting to escape back to his home, the woods, anywhere but the location he was currently in, a puff of smoke signified the arrival of someone, perhaps Naruto's savior. But then he saw it. The pair of eyes the same color as the coppery liquid dripping all over the street. He didn't know what it was, and yet anything that had eyes that color were something to fear. The figure stopped as it noticed the 7-year-old's presence. Naruto couldn't quite make out the figure, only lots of black, a pale face and those terrible, haunting eyes. And as he stared unbelievingly at the man in front of him, so casually standing amongst the prevalent carnage of families that were once people, living, breathing, laughing people, a slight, bloodthirsty grin formed on the man's porcelain face. What a surprise! The drawling statement made Naruto's stomach retch, and he clutched at the offending organ as he stared in utter terror as the figure began to move towards him. The man's footfalls squelching in the blood and gore strewn on the street reached the Jinchuriki's ears as he was rooted to the spot in utter fear. The figure stopped in front of him. Naruto was able to make out only his eyes, nose and mouth, as the rest of him, from top to toe, was covered entirely in black clothing. It was impossible to identify anything else due to the blackness of the obsidian night, and his gaze was drawn to the only source of light, those dreadful crimson eyes. And in that moment, the Uzumaki realized the truth encompassed by the saying, "The eyes are the windows to the soul." The sheer fury and disgust within the man shone like an inferno as he glared ferociously down at the blonde preteen. The bleach-white skin of his mouth was stretched in an almost gleefully evil smile, one that could only promise torture and pain to anyone who had the misfortune to experience it. Like a ghost. And then it hit him, so fast he was unable to comprehend what had happened until, in a bone-jarring crunch, he hit the wall. The man's fist had simply disappeared, and then Naruto was indented into a brick wall. Still grinning, the man began to walk towards Naruto once again. It was only then that Naruto's self-preservation instinct kicked in. Without realizing it, he performed the kawarimi without hand seals and found himself regarding his attacker from down the street. The brief surprise that appeared on the shinobi's face disappeared as he chuckled sinisterly. "So you can do something." Turning, Naruto once again caught a glimpse of those blood-filled eyes. He shakily brought his arms up to guard himself, and yet he knew he was no match. He distantly realized that this man was simply playing with him, like a cat does a shiny ball when it sees it in a side alley. And there was nothing that could prepare him for what happened next. Another ninja appeared next to the first, crouching like a tiger, a blade dripping rivulets of blood clenched in his right hand. The newcomer was in full umbu gear and had the same swirling red eyes of the Sharingan blazing as he regarded the figure in front of him. "Madara-sama, the mission has been accomplished. Not a single one was left alive." The other figure nodded. "Leave me, I have some unfinished business to complete with my young acquaintance." The second figure turned, but paused as he spied Naruto at the end of the street. His eyes widened imperceptibly as he took in the frightened 7-year-old, quailing at the corner of one of the Japan-style houses typical to the Uchiha district. "I said leave." The thunderous growl jerked the new arrival and he disappeared in a swirl of leaves. The shinobi identified as Madara, simply disappeared as well. Naruto had absolutely no time to even attempt a guard as a punch slammed into his chest. Almost faster than his brain could register, the black-clad ninja followed it up with 3 more punches, 2 to his chest and another to his gut. Finally, Naruto was hit by a devastating uppercut and his small form was thrown like a rag doll into the Uchiha district's wall. His body slid down until he sat in a slumping position, his head lowered and his body battered with the aching pains from the blows he had just received. Madara stepped lightly until he was directly in front of the blonde once again. Reaching out with a pale fingertip, he hooked the end of Naruto's top and pulled it up to reveal his stomach. "It was unlucky for you to have met me this night, young Kuwabai. As you can see, my faithful apprentice and I have just finished disposing of the trash housed within these walls. A bin requires cleaning once in a while, wouldn't you agree?" A sardonic grin once again curled the edges of the nin's mouth. "Within you is sealed a beast of great power. My pet, the Kuwabai no Yoko. If you ever come in contact with him, kindly relay my words to him. You have failed, my pet. I will save you, but for your failure I will require double the payment." The tip of his outstretched finger made contact with the smooth skin of Naruto's belly and Naruto blearily felt something probing into his body. And then it appeared. A blazing black tattoo of such complexity that Naruto knew in his young mind that no tattooist could have ever done such a thing. And that is all the proof you require. If you resist me, then grow strong, strong enough to fight me. You have tasted but a particle's worth of my strength, so know what you are up against. But know this, I will be back, and when I return it is either your death or mine, Uzumaki Naruto. The figure withdrew his finger and Naruto suddenly felt all his energy drain from him. In a last-ditch effort, he painfully made the seals for the Gukakyo. As Madara walked away, the fireball consumed him whole, and yet Naruto felt no satisfaction from scoring a hit on his attacker. Evil laughter rang raucously from the center of the ball of fire, but when it extinguished there was nothing in its wake. Madara. His whisper was caught by the two figures that appeared at that instant, as Naruto slumped sideways into unconsciousness. In a dark and damp corner of Naruto's subconscious, a lethargic crimson eye slowly opened. He was no pet and the Uchiha would do well to remember that. And no payment was given when there was nothing to pay for. The eye closed once again as darkness enveloped it once again. Uchiha Itachi dashed through Konoha's forest at top speed. The world was a blur to him as he sped through the undergrowth, the greens and browns of the plants around melding into one as they zipped past him. His senses caught the tri-layered genjutsu almost immediately and his Sharingan eyes revolved into life as he dispelled all three layers. As he completed this task, his body revolved 180 degrees in the air, his feet latching onto the nearest tree with chakra, and his Chokyuto hissing as it was removed from its sheath at high speed, his whole world spinning as he completed the maneuver. Suddenly, the tilting world came to an abrupt halt, and Itachi felt the bite of a kunai against his throat, whilst his own weapon had found the neck of his assailant. He regarded the three tomo of each eye of the Uchiha in front of him. Shisui. Said Uchiha was tensed like a tightly coiled spring, if Itachi even moved a nanometer his jugular would be severed. Both Uchiha were suspended horizontally on the surface of a great elm in Konoha's outer forest. It was a small concession that his opponent was in the same situation, he was no good to anyone if he was dead. So it was you. Shisui's gaze was hard as he stared into his best friend's eyes. He knew something was up and he had gone scouting only to find his clan slaughtered on his return. Itachi would be dead if he had been anyone else, Shinkiro no Shisui never left an opponent alive. Shisui, there is no time for this. You do not comprehend the situation at this moment. I have not the time to explain it to you. Itachi rarely spoke with emotion, yet his voice had quivered in that instant. It was low and the words were spoken quickly, completely uncharacteristic of the usually monotonous shinobi. He scrutinized the Uchiha killer's eyes to find any deception in that statement. He didn't find any. Slowly, he tilted his kunai away from the neck of his best friend and retracted his arm. Itachi resheathed his sword. Why? On orders. Shisui's eyes flicked to the side when he heard that statement. So it had been a coup, Sandai must have figured it out. Survivors. Shisui saw it then, the slight tremble of the other's eyes when he comprehended his question. Itachi's answer was swift. 3, including yourself. Springing to a tree further from Itachi, he landed on a branch crouched and ready to take flight again. I will never agree with your method. We shall meet again. The two disappeared as they sped off in opposite directions. A leaf fell to the forest floor and lay there, completely untouched by the confrontation that had just taken place. Tenten sped down the hallway of Konoha Central Hospital. There weren't many words that could describe the kind of feelings she was experiencing at that moment. Her mind was in turmoil from all the information that had been disclosed to her just 20 minutes prior. She had returned from her evening training like normal. Naruto hadn't been home and although odd, she disregarded it as something else he was doing that night. She remembered cracking a smile and thinking that it would have been interesting to see what he had been up to. How drastically wrong she had been. She had taken a quick bath. She hated showers, you had to stand up and take them, who could be bothered to do that? Plus you had to keep adjusting the water temperature and that was just downright long. So she had taken a hot bath. And once she had been satisfied that her skin had wrinkled enough for the next few days, she had got out and proceeded to make something for her to eat. And then the shinobi had arrived. Soft as a feather, Tenten didn't hear anything until the ninja had knocked on the door. Thinking it was Naruto, she had opened it to find the imposing mask of an Umbu agent staring at her. What would the elite of the village be doing here? In a soft voice, devoid of all emotion, the Umbu designated rat had said the words she had not been expecting. The Uchiha clan has been massacred. Your roommate has been injured. The medics have asked for your presence, so please make haste to comply. And that was it. The ninja had simply disappeared and Tenten had been left standing in the doorway, unable to comprehend what had just occurred. Naruto, in the hospital. She had muttered to herself. Realizing just what had come out of her own mouth, she had quickly dressed and left the apartment, making sure to lock it with the spare key Naruto had given her all those months ago. And now she found herself in front of his door. Room 225, a designated room for trauma and coma patients. Taking that as a bad sign, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dark, and apart from a small bedside lamp that was lit, no light sources were switched on. With a start, the bun-haired brunette realized that there were 3 people in the room already, and they were conversing in low tones. Her eyes widened when she realized that they weren't just any old people, they were the Sandaime, Jiraiya of the Sunin, and a silver-haired Umbu agent. This was no ordinary meeting, that much she was sure of. Something was going on here. All 3 elite shinobi paid her no heed, as if they knew she wasn't a threat, and she frowned slightly at that. They must have a technique or something that alerted them to anyone in the vicinity. Slowly, she moved forward to see the dark figure lying on the bed. She gasped at what she saw. Naruto, one of the strongest and most cheerful boys she had ever seen, was laying deathly still. There was a large, angry, red welt on his lower jaw, bandages wrapped under and above the obvious injury site as if to keep it in place. More bandages were wrapped around his upper torso and his gut. His face was deathly pale, and this caused the 3 whisker marks that she could see on the left side of his face to stand out. We found him passed out when we got there. There was no way we could have left him among all the dead bodies. His psyche is already damaged enough from what has happened, and I shudder to think what would have occurred had he woken up among that massacre. Tenten turned to find the Hokage addressing the Umbu. Massacre? The Uchiha were massacred? That's right, she shook herself, that's what the other Umbu had said too. Who could do such a thing? If what we heard is correct, there is absolutely no telling what could be happening within our borders at the moment. Kakashi, I want you to take Umbu squads Alpha, Beta, and Delta. Spread out, comb the area, and don't let a single thing escape you. If you encounter any Uchiha, do not engage them. This is a flee on-site order. Am I understood? The Sandaime's face was grim as he stared down at the face of her friend. Hi, Hokage-sama. The Umbu agent paused for a moment, his mask directed at Naruto, and seemed to almost sigh, before disappearing in a swirl of leaves. Was that really necessary, sensei? They are probably long gone by now. As soon as Jiraiya spoke those words, the Sandaime rounded on him, his gaze like steel. You do not have a right to question my actions. You know very well where you stand right now, so do not push me. The red-clad shinobi bristled at the anger directed at him, but didn't retort. It was almost as if the Uchiha were involved in their own massacre. Tenten shrugged over her unease over the recent exchange and spoke up in a tentative tone. Ah, Hokage-sama. What's wrong with Naruto? Turning as if he only just noticed the young girl, Sarutobi smiled tiredly as he replied. Tenten, I assume Naruto has been talking about you a lot recently. At Tenten's silent response, he sighed and continued. Naruto was caught up in one of the greatest tragedies to hit Konoha. Someone has killed the entire Uchiha clan, save 2, and the attacker deemed it necessary to attack the poor boy just because he was there. Motioning to the bed, the Hokage frowned. It seems young Naruto's attacker was merciless in his assault and Naruto has suffered quite a few injuries. Tenten stepped forward to view the blonde from a better angle. She found the Hokage's arm blocking her and she stared in shock at the leader of her village. "Don't wake him." It was an absolute order, and Tenten would have sooner jumped out the window than defy the Sandame's order, such was her respect for the venerable Hokage. As they all gazed at the unconscious blonde, some banging by the door was heard before it was thrown violently inwards, the handle smacking loudly into the wall. The two ninja had reacted faster than Tenten's eyes could track. 1 second they were peering down at the comatose patient and the next, they were standing on either side of the intruder, 2 kunai to his neck. Tenten noticed the Toad Sennin recoil in shock before the Hokage. "Uchiha!" It was barely a whisper. The intruder's eyes were wide in shock. He was wearing the standard Konoha military police uniform of black t-shirt with the Uchiha fan emblazoned on the back, along with black pants and shinobi sandals. His hair was frazzled and unkempt, as if he had been through a great storm, but the most distinguishing thing about him was the pair of glowing red eyes that stared wildly around the room. "Uchiha Shisui. Report. Your body was found missing at the Uchiha district. Where have you been? Your clan is dead." The teenager identified as Shisui didn't seem surprised from the Hokage's words, but was quick to respond. "Sir, I have some urgent news. I met Uchiha Itachi fleeing to the north in the 4th quadrant of the Konoha forest. Was he the culprit?" The Sandame ignored the question as his face grew anxious. "What transpired from your encounter?" Shisui's eyes glinted knowingly. "I am invoking Code Red on this report, sir. It's for your ears only." The Hokage nodded slightly, his face softening in obvious relief. "More importantly, who from my family survived?" The Hokage turned back to watch the blonde-haired occupant on the hospital bed before answering. "Your second aunt, Uchiha Mikoto, and her son, Sasuke. There were no other survivors." Again, Tenten realized that the shock portrayed by the shinobi was far less than what should have been when someone was told that most of their family was dead. What was up with this guy? She didn't notice the slightly saddened expression that flitted across the Uchiha's face. Did he really? "Shisui. We will discuss that at a later time. For now we must attend to the survivors." The Hokage had swung around to confront the teenager when he had spoken, and in doing so, the Uchiha noticed the still form of the person on the bed. He gasped. "Naruto-kun. What has he got to do with all this? Why is he here?" Tenten heard sincere surprise in the elder boy's voice. "He was caught up in the massacre. It seems that the attacker beat him quite heavily before he left." The Uchiha looked down sadly at the sleeping form of the blonde. After a while he turned and made his way unobstructed, out of the door. Probably going to check on his family, Tenten thought. All three left in the room once again turned to regard the blonde Jinchuriki. For a while there was silence, but then an atmosphere of shock settled in as Naruto began to stir. He shouldn't be waking up yet. What's going on? Tenten was getting worried. Too many odd things were happening. As Naruto opened his eyes, all three ran to his bedside, Jiraiya placing his hand on the boy's shoulder to stop him from sitting up and doing any more damage to his healing injuries. The blonde preteen's eyes were dull and listless, their delphinium glow absent, as they took in the three faces above him. Jiraiya removed his hand and Naruto began to struggle to sit up. This time the Sandame reached out, but he did not stop him, rather he placed his hand on the boy's back, lending him support to raise himself. Tenten stepped back with the others as Naruto glanced around the dimly lit room before staring out the window. He suddenly burst out laughing, his tone cracked and his mouth obviously parched. His laughter degenerated into short wheezing as his lung capacity gave out. The three other occupants turned to stare at each other. Why was he laughing? The Kuwabai. The scratchy words that emitted from the blonde's lips caused an immediate reaction. The Hokage and the Gamasenin recoiled as Tenten's confused gaze shifted between her friend and the elder shinobi. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably. What was he? Tenten. The bun-haired girl snapped to attention as the Sandaime addressed her. Please return to your current lodgings. We three have much to discuss. Tenten stared for a moment and made to reply before remembering just who she was speaking to. Blushing in embarrassment, she lowered her head, before striding quickly to the door and exiting, closing the door softly behind her. Tenten hurried towards the hospital exit. What was so important that she couldn't be there? She had come all the way to see her friend after all, and it just seemed weird that the Hokage would send her away. And what was it that Naruto had said? Something about a Kyuubi. Nine tails. She thought to herself. I'm sure I've heard that term before. Snapping out of her reverie, she continued on her way home. At least Naruto was fine, right? What do you know of the Kyuubi, Naruto-kun? The question wasn't said in an angry way, and yet, it was one that Naruto knew that he had to answer. The Kyuubi is sealed inside of me. That's what he said, that Madara. Jiraiya sucked in a breath sharply. His head snapped to look at the Sandaime. This changed everything. Naruto knew, there was no doubt about it, both of Madara and of his tenant. From his earlier behavior, neither of the elder shinobi could guess the mental state Naruto was currently in. A seal. He showed me the seal you have hid from me. Pulling up the hospital gown through the bandages, he poked his belly button. Right here. Big and black, and it definitely wasn't a tattoo. Naruto's head rose and his eyes bored defiantly into the old Hokage's visage. His face had twisted into a vicious sneer, his eyes devoid of any of their previous light. His mind had been damaged beyond repair. And yet the Hokage remained silent. All these years I wondered why everyone hated me. Why they always glared at me and sometimes threw things at me. And you knew all this time, didn't you, Jiji? Naruto's nickname for the Hokage came out scathing, nothing like how much love and trust the blonde used to say that name with. This time, Sarutobi visibly winced. There was no getting out of this situation, he had to explain it as carefully as possible. Naruto-kun, Uchiha Madara is a very evil man. While the Kyuubi is indeed within you, do not take what he has said as truth. The Kyuubi was a beast of incredible power, it was not possible to destroy such a thing, and so the Yondaime was forced to seal it within you. You are not the Kyuubi, only its jailer. Can a glass be the water within it? There was a notable hint of desperation in the old Hokage's words. No. Jiraiya glanced back at the Uzumaki heir worriedly. This didn't look good at all. No, I know I'm not the Kyuubi. Otherwise I would have been able to defend myself against him. There was just so much blood. The blonde cried out in horror and terror at the crimes that had been committed that night, grabbing his head in his hands as his whole body shook. Sarutobi cursed aloud. He knew the boy's mind was shattered, maybe irreparably. Hadn't he sworn to protect Minato's son from this happening? Striding forward, the Hokage wrapped the Jinchuriki in a tight embrace. He was startled when his student gripped his shoulder and pulled him back forcefully. What will you do, kid? Will you sit here and cry? The room became deathly silent as Sarutobi stared at his student in shock. Jiraiya was studying the Jinchuriki intently, his eyes fixed upon his godson like a vice. Naruto's tear-stained face rose to regard the owner of the voice. Will you snivel and cry, whilst others plan to take your life? Will you be content to have this death sentence hanging over your head for the rest of your life? Naruto's eyes were wide, and the blue of his iris shook slightly as he tried to rationalize why this man was asking him these questions. Madara will be back, and next time he'll want your head. Will you stand against him, or will you stay laying here as a weak brat until that time comes? Jiraiya's voice was like steel, his tones hard and his volume forceful. Like hell he would let the son of the greatest shinobi and Hokage to fall at the first obstacle. He had resolved himself to support his godson and he would be there to help him out of his every pitfall. He would not return to his old lifestyle, not after all he had concluded. He would not be like his two wayward teammates, wasting away with their own problems having forgotten in what direction their responsibilities lay. Naruto began to laugh again. His laughter rose to mad cackles as his small frame shook from his mirth. As quickly as it came, his bout of laughter came to an abrupt halt and his mouth twisted upward in a cruel smile. He didn't answer. He simply lay back down and turned over, facing away from the two elder shinobi. Sarutobi and Jiraiya exchanged a glance and Jiraiya shrugged at the slight expression of reproach on his sensei's face. Staring for a little while longer at the boy's still form, they realized he had gone back to sleep. Sarutobi decided to have a Yamanaka check on the boy's mind to make sure the events hadn't completely broken him. At least the seal was still working fine, he didn't want a mad Baijuya destroying the village anytime soon. Nodding at each other, the student and teacher began to make their way to the door. Stopping, Jiraiya threw a perplexed glance at the previously happy bundle of energy. Just how bad had his mind been affected? When Naruto had awoken, he had seen three blurry faces staring down at him. As he waited for his vision to clear up, his mind began to kick back into full gear and with it, the events of the night. Uchiha Madara? A seal. And the Kyuubi was locked in the seal, and it was Madara's pet. Naruto still couldn't comprehend the alarming things that had been revealed to him. He was weak, that much he realized. His taijutsu was almost non-existent and it was proven by how easily he had been manhandled by the psychotic Sharingan user. He hadn't even been able to block a single punch, let alone fight back. And this guy was coming back for him. Like hell he was going to stand by and let himself die. He wasn't going to allow the sadness and anger from his childhood get him now, not after all this time. He had already resolved to live his life how he wanted, and he wasn't going to let any threats get in his way. You know what this means though, don't you? His subconscious replied for him. We have to get stronger. Strong enough to be able to defeat that guy. Slowly, the blonde-haired Jinchuriki looked around the room before looking out the window at the Hokage monument. A small thought flashed in his mind, which in its delirious state, caused him to burst out laughing. I'll have to pull that prank on the monument. I don't know why I put it off for later. And with that, he turned to the occupants of his hospital room, the prior tragedy returning full force and with it, the sickening smell and feel of blood, as if this room had been part of the massacre too. His fear-induced mind rocked as he strove to fortify himself against his impending madness. All his senses were strained at the three who were staring at him in obvious concern, but he now knew that they had hid things from him. Things that were destroying his world and causing his bloody nemesis to return full force in his mind's eye. He would have his answers this night. And then when he was free of the hospital, he would prepare himself to stop any and all people that stood in the way of his life. It had only taken a day for the populace of Konoha to realize the sudden change in Naruto's behavior. It was by no means subtle. As soon as he had been released, he had taken to training like a fish to water. Furthermore, the Hokage was receiving strange news that his successor's son had taken to fighting anyone who tried to jump him in the seedier parts of Konoha's expanse. The report stated that he wouldn't use any ninjutsu whatsoever. He would simply go in there all fists blazing, and Sarutobi was beginning to wonder if Naruto had finally lost it and gone crazy. And yet, apart from that, he still seemed to be carrying on the life's goal he had set for himself. One day he had set himself in a tent on top of Hokage Monument and stayed there for a week. No one had known what he was up to until a bright summer's morning, typical of Konoha, where the villagers and shinobi alike had awoken to find the Hokage monument decorated in the most ridiculous face painting anyone had ever seen. As Sarutobi had made his way to the office, one villager had succinctly summed up the majority of people's thoughts. Are those Akimichi swirls? And how come the Shoda's the only one with trees growing out of his nose? There had been instant uproar. Everyone knew who the culprit was, there was no way it could be anyone else. And yet, no one could catch him. Teams of Umbu, Jounin, Shuyunin, and even Jiraiya himself had been trying all morning, and yet, the 7-year-old had taken to using the chakra beacon in his own unique way before using the true purpose of it, decreasing his chakra output to disguise himself as a civilian who couldn't do any ninja techniques. Not to mention he was fast, knew the Konoha streets far better than his pursuers, and also, the fact that every now and then the shinobi had to waste time dodging random attacks being thrown at them and their resulting complications. One example of this was a Chuyunin team led by Umino Irika from the academy. Irika was leading this particular team because he was known for his gentle way of handling kids that seemed to create a bond of trust between the two. Just as they had rounded a corner chasing the young Jinhuriki, they realized just who was the cat and who were the mice. A blue dragon formed entirely of water burst from the mouth of a nondescript civilian and hurtled towards the Chuyunin. Immediately, the medium-ranked ninjas scattered their formation, taking cover behind the veranda of a fruit seller's shop. They couldn't have known that Naruto was aiming for the cloth overlay that protected the stand outside, advertising fresh fruit to all the potential customers that would walk by. The cloth immediately billowed inwards, straining against the volume of water it was trying to hold, before finally giving out and collapsing inwards, drenching the hiding ninja to the bone. In their soggy moment of distraction, the irritating blonde had upped and disappeared, his eventual location not a single person knew. Naruto's village-wide excursion of the Hokage monument had been the only prank he had played that month. He had thrown himself into his training, his taijutsu improving by practice and his ninjutsu through scrolls. But Tenten was becoming more and more worried when the once sunny blonde didn't smile for almost a whole month. He was only worried about getting stronger, and this seemed to go against everything he stood for. A particularly clear moment had been when Tenten had come home from training at Higurashi Naoto's weapons store and informed her roommate of being taught sealing methods. The blonde had jumped at the opportunity to learn another skill and had badgered the young girl into teaching him too. After much persuasion on Naruto's part, the bun-haired academy student relented. She would have anyway since Naruto let her learn from his scrolls, but she thought that she might be able to get a reaction from him if she was annoying. And yet, he had kept a level head and simply continued to ask. Not even when Tenten had gone overboard saying that he couldn't possibly learn it as it was too difficult for him, he had just shrugged it off and proceeded to ask again. Having taught the blonde the basics of what she had learned, she had proceeded to examine him for a few days. She was shocked and jealous at what she saw. Naruto was getting stronger at an alarming rate. He had mastered all of the techniques he had been given, and Tenten even saw him pull off the Kawarimi no Jutsu without hand seals. What really began to tip her scales, though, was that he was even receiving help from Jiraiya of the Sunin. The seeds of her jealousy and anger had been planted, and when she found Naruto with the 3 steps to learning the Yandame's signature offensive technique, she quite literally lost herself, and this led to her falling out with her friend. Her jealousy and pride so strong, on her request, she moved to the Higurashi's residence and continued to train there. The impact of this broken friendship would cause huge consequences, not just to Konoha, but to the entire shinobi world. It would not be for many years till their friendship was renewed. Naruto stared down at the pair of short swords he had received from Tenten on his 7th birthday. They were a stunning pair, resembling the twin daggers Naruto had bought for his ex-friend on her birthday prior to the Uchiha event. They were a shining silver color with a sapphire dragon stretching from hilt to tip, the silver of the blade accentuating the beauty and shine of the dragon. Every inch of the twin blades were polished to perfection, their edges sharpened and their hilts wrapped. Naruto gazed forlornly at the blades. He had no idea why Tenten had been so angry at him. Was it because he was training so hard? Was it because he couldn't tell her about what happened that night and the subsequent conversation with the Hokage? Was it simply because he hadn't talked to her much? Naruto couldn't comprehend the fact that it was a mixture of these reasons, added to her growing jealousy at the attention he received from the Hokage and Jiraiya. He knew it was his fault in some way, maybe he had been too hard on everyone. Deep down he blamed the entire fiasco on his inability to get over the tragedies that had accompanied him throughout his life. No, he would no longer run away from his problems. He would no longer freeze up when he saw blood or a dead body. And he would definitely get strong enough to defeat the people that wanted him as an enemy. If ninja could kill, he would just have to be able to without being a shinobi. With his resolve once again stoked, Jiraiya noticed the complete reversion Naruto's personality had. He was once again the thrumming bundle of energy he had always been, but with a significant difference, and this puzzled the elder ninja to no end. His best friend was no longer with him. The once inseparable pair of orphans were no longer seen together, and Jiraiya knew he was hurting inside. Before he left for his latest spying mission in T, he absently wondered to what Naruto would direct his attention to after this development. Naturally he would be shocked when he returned. There will be another time skip next chapter. As most of you would have gathered from reading this, the massacre's events were necessary to set up the storyline, and with that we end one of the major arcs of this FIC. Next chapter will see the prequel chapter to the Uzumaki World Tour arc, and I'm sure that comment is going to all make you wonder just what the hell I mean by it. We see a return to the more humor-driven side of the story, but I don't want to give too much away. I bet no one saw the breakup of Naruto and Tenten coming. I'd been planning that for a while. Just so you people aren't too angry about that, I'm including an omake. ZZZZZZZ. Naruto was stumped. There must be a reason to the chakra beacon other than to project your chakra. I mean, come on, when did you ever feel anyone using it? If it was such a widely known jutsu, why had he never felt it? Experimenting with his chakra constantly, he noticed that his chakra would move faster through his body whenever he used the beacon. Was it possible to slow it down? If that was the case, shouldn't he be able to apply the same theory to the air pads to allow him to walk without a sound? Hee. Sounds like a new prank's in order. It was midday in the Konoha market district. The hustle and bustle of the shoppers was at its height as vendors shouted out deals and customers rushed to buy the goods they needed. In the middle of this stood an average-looking boy around 9 years old, carrying a small duffel bag from which he calmly took a pair of headphones that looked oddly like what a builder used when manning a pneumatic drill. After fixing them to his head, he brought his hands up and clasped them into a typical shinobi hand seal. And then utter chaos broke out. Naruto, under 3 layers of disguise, a henge to blend in, his chakra levels lowered to that of an average citizen and his feet covered with a thin layer of chakra that exited his body whenever he made a step, effectively causing him to make no noise as he walked, released all layers of his disguise and initiating the other use he had found in the chakra beacon. Hatake Kakashi's head swiveled around as he silently patrolled the market districts, noticing the Kyuubi's chakra being used in that direction. It was monstrous. The elite ninja was breaking out in a sweat at the possible meaning of such an event. Had the Kyuubi escaped its prison? When he reached the location, he almost sweat dropped at the sight of Naruto laughing uproariously as every villager around him ran around like chickens out of their hutch. The aura of death and decay had disappeared, and Kakashi sighed at what this would mean for him: more paperwork and cleaning up after the villagers who couldn't hold their bladders.